Hi, good.
Good. Good.
All right. Looks like we're all here. We'll go ahead and call the retreat meeting to order. We've got several items to discuss on the agenda this evening. Does anyone have any preferences for the order on the agenda? I'm looking at the agenda as it's ordered and just thought we'd go through it in that order unless there's a preference to handle things in a different order.
I'd like to suggest we move the discussion of COVID-19 and our response closer to the top of the list.
Okay. All right, do you want to just kick that off? Do you want to start with that?
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Why don't you go ahead, Laura?
Sure. So
You're muted.
Muted.
there we go. Sorry. So wanted to set this time on the agenda for all of us to kind of take a step back from the tactical and look at the big picture with COVID-19. I think we've had a lot of actions that have already been taken, like the governor's shelter in place. And certainly there's more to come in terms of when that's lifted. I was not able to yet listen to the press conference that was held this afternoon on that. But I do think that there's room for us to start thinking about how COVID-19 is going to affect everything we do for the next year. You know, the example from last Monday's meeting was around some of the events that we have planned. I'm very sensitive to the fact that our town staff have limited capacity, and as do our volunteers on the various committees. So I think it would be great if we as a board could provide some direction to both town staff and to the committees around, you know, what sorts of activities should they be considering moving forward with over the coming months. Certainly recognize that all of this will probably pivot quite a bit as we get new information about how a vaccine is progressing and how the virus is progressing. But to give one example, I think with the 4th of July, I mean, I don't want to say no matter what happens because there's a lot that's unforeseen, but I think it's highly unlikely that we're going to want to convene thousands of people in Purple Park for a pancake breakfast. That's one example, and I know that town staff has been working on some alternatives to that. But I think even in seeing some of the emails that have gone to that have been flying between the committees, it would be great if we could provide more direction on what should they be looking to do? How should they be thinking about their planning for the coming months? We have some committees that have taken a pause on all their activities, others that are trying to move forward in a virtual direction. So I think, you know, for one topic around this, I think it would be important to give some direction for how everyone should proceed in a more organized manner. In terms of other things, I think I'd like us to consider some potential ways that we might be able to help improve social distancing here in town, even if they haven't come at the state level. So for example, do we want to consider setting trails and sidewalks to be one way instead of you know, free for all the way it typically is? Some towns have found success with saying all pedestrians should always be walking against the traffic, even if you're on the sidewalk. And that can help a lot. I had a situation this weekend when I was out walking the dog. I was coming one way down the sidewalk, two people walking the same exact speed on both sides of the sidewalk opposite me. Now, luckily, we don't have a lot of traffic these days, and it was a residential street, so I was able to pass them by just walking down the middle of the road. But, you know, if we have everybody going one direction, other municipalities have found that that could be a help. So I'll kind of pause there. That's a couple initial things. I think there's a lot to talk about with this, but I want to open it up.
Okay, thanks for the opening remarks. Others have comments?
So I can jump in. I Laura, I appreciate you bringing this forward to make sure that we have uh, the proper coordination and response from our community. Um, I think uh, town staff so far, Matt, your team's done a great job coordinating what needs to be done around town. I think that the governor and Boulder County Health have done a great job of both setting the standard for what needs to be done in Boulder County Health and guiding us from a health perspective. Um, as far as additional measures that need to be taken, I'm not sure, um, given the size of our municipality, our lack of having a health department or anything to guide us from some type of medical perspective. With expert opinions on that matter, I don't feel comfortable necessarily making these decisions without the express guidance of those experts. If we were Denver and we had those types of resources, I think it'd be different. But we're at kind of that crucial moment now where there's discussion of reopening and how do we reopen. And I think taking a singular municipality approach isn't necessarily the most efficient or effective way to, at this point, be legislating what the rules are. Moving forward in a coordinated fashion at the county or even state level ensures that everybody is doing the same thing, make sure that everyone's playing by the same rules. If one municipality takes steps that are way more restrictive than another, well, that other one, it's not like there's a travel restriction between the two towns, so there's not going to be any way to keep the virus out in that aspect. So it has to be a coordinated approach. So I'm not sure I favor any additional just town-specific regulations. And from a just the trails coordination perspective you mentioned, I've run into the exact same problem you have walking our dogs, where I had two people coming at me on different sides of the street and did the exact same thing you did and ended up walking in the street. And frankly, I think there's a level where legislating down to becomes more burdensome, and there's no way that we could possibly ever control it or enforce it. And it's better to let people make those decisions for themselves. And I would trust the people in our town to make wise decisions in that respect.
I mean, with regard to the state and county coordination, one of the things that I keep thinking about is kind of how do we make the right decisions for our town? Ken, as you pointed out, we are a very small municipality compared to some of our neighbors, but that's where I think we have some benefit to it. When Governor Polis had to make the difficult decision to issue the shelter in place order, he had to balance a lot of different information for that. You know, he had to look at various industries that might be shut down and, you know, economic revenue, all of that. I think we're at a huge advantage in that we are able to look at a small enough segment of the state and of the population that we can make perhaps better decisions because we're seeing things at the micro level rather than the macro level. And that's where I think we should absolutely be open to making different decisions for Superior than we're necessarily making statewide. That's not at all to say that Governor Polis isn't doing a good job, because I think he is. He just has a lot of differing populations to consider, whereas in Superior, you know, we can look at the details and figure out what's right for our citizens.
I'll just add, I'm not opposed to the idea. I mean, I do like this thought exercise. I think, you know, I've had the same problem as Ken. You know, I have a badly behaved dog on a leash, which kind of necessitates me to walk into the street and around people, and I've been doing that for a very long time. You know, and I do like the idea of having directions on trails. It helps, so then you're not stepping off into what should be prairie grass and or creating extra erosion. I think that the biggest challenge we have is just the fact that we back up to Boulder County open space, and we need, I really do believe we need a regional approach, at least within Boulder County, because we could do something. We don't have a lot of open space trails within the town of Superior, and we have Coyote Ridge, and part of that, you know, traipses through private land. So then how do you even implement that? But if we can at least engage Boulder County, and possibly do something at a grander scale, I think it'll have a greater impact. Because if we try to do something just for Superior, you're going to cross McCaslin, and it's not going to pertain any longer. Whereas, and that, if anybody saw the parking lot this past weekend, it was a zoo. Everybody's out and about, which is great for the trails. But if you're trying to keep a 6-foot social distance, you're really getting out into damaging, the fragile ecosystems around the trails. How we do that with Boulder County, I don't know. Because Ken did bring up a good point. We don't have a Department of Health. They do. They've got the powerhouse, the economics to drive the right decision making. And just looking at the numbers for the last week, the number of cases in Superior, number of cases in Erie are significantly below the rest of the community, the rest of the county. So, maybe the regional approach can work, but maybe it shouldn't work. I honestly don't know. I'm looking to some experts that can help guide us here. I struggle with just trying to implement something for the sake of implementing something unless we've got some data that we know that will help get there. And I think Boulder County is trying to do that for us.
So one other idea, and I think I had mentioned this in a previous email as well, that I think we could implement for Superior, regardless of what other towns are doing, is requiring everyone who enters a Superior business to be wearing a mask, not specifying what type of mask that is, but that you have to be wearing something over your face when you're in a public business. I think that's something that, you're right, there are businesses over the bridge that we couldn't do that for, but I think that would be one way of, taking an extra step here.
So Laura, I'll weigh in with my thoughts first. Again, good. I'm glad we're having a discussion. I think you had a few really good, interesting suggestions. And while some are policy related, some are community related, some are just calendar related, like around the 4th of July. The way I'm bucketing them are sort of things we could legislate or rule make about, and things that are just good ideas, common practices. I'm very interested in having a conversation around good idea, common practices, around what we can and should be doing from a town, whether or not it's additional signage or more notifications around the town webpage, or us being consistently using the same narrative, the same language, so things are perfectly clear. I think that's great, and I think we should. And I think you're also right around the 4th of July. I'm not ready to throw in the towel around the 4th of July yet, but what I do hope to have today, if today is April 20th, I'd love to establish a date by which we will have a decision around what we're doing for the 4th of July. Whether or not that's May 20th or June 4th, I don't care. But I'd like to have a date where we know for certain what we're doing, so the community and the vendors can plan accordingly. But I chunk this into legislative rulemaking things and voluntary things. From my perspective, on a legislative point of view, I personally have no appetite at this time to legislate. Sorry, thank you. Snacks. I personally have no interest to legislate beyond what is happening at the community level, at the county level, and at the state level. I just think it would be. I think it would confuse people. I think we're already. I have a lot of reasons why I feel this way, but we're already starting to see, protests in Denver, and some amount of civil disobedience, and I just don't think it's appropriate for us to legislate like that at this time. I'm not even sure we can, but whether or not we can or we can't, I just personally will have no interest and will be a vocal opponent to it. Now, if the county does something horrendously stupid, or the state does something horrendously stupid, then I'll be the first person raising my hand to try to protect the community from a public safety perspective. But I think the county's doing a nice job. I think neighboring counties, specifically Broomfield, are doing a nice job. I think Governor Polis is doing a nice job. I think our, thrilled that we had the opportunity to listen to both Senator Bennett and Senator Gardner within the last few weeks. I think they're doing a nice job in Washington protecting residents of Colorado. So just nothing from my viewpoint, nothing from a legislative standpoint.
Now,
But if somebody wants to go out and, let me just finish, sorry, Ken. But if somebody wants to go out and paint, like 20 minutes ago, we walked the dog around Wildflower, and I intentionally walked to the right because people were going in a counterclockwise, I suppose. People were already walking in a counterclockwise way. And I looked and I thought, oh, it's going to make more sense for me. I won't have to pass anybody if I walk in the same way as them. We're just doing one loop, no big deal. Had I walked clockwise, I would have passed 2 or 3 other families and would have had that pinch point. If somebody as a community level wants to go out and paint, directional arrows in chalk around some of our paths, I think that's great, but I do not want that enforced or policed or anybody doing anything, saying, oh, this is a one-way path. No, it's a gentle suggestion. So I like gentle suggestions, not legislative maneuvers. My viewpoint.
Now, Kevin, one of the things you said, and Laura, you brought up as well, from talking about the 4th of July, and then Kevin speaking to let's have a date certain to know when we need to go forward. I think that's the important point to expand on, and where we can then pick up the torch for what's needed. But I'm looking to Matt for you to drive that type of conversation. So Matt is the manager of the town. It's his responsibility to make sure that everything is running appropriately, doing the day-to-day. And thus far, he's doing a great job with that. What I'm going to be wanting to hear, and what I imagine will be part of the conversation at our meeting next week, when I think we tentatively have a finance update on it on the agenda, is talking about things that, do we need to postpone any projects? Do we need to be changing direction of projects? Do we need to be thinking about that? Should 1500 Colton continue to be built this year? Do we have anybody who's coming forth as partners anymore? If we did, are they backing out? I mean, these are all of the major considerations that are direction altering decisions that should come to us. And if they are relevant, that's what I'd be looking for Matt to bring to us, and that we should be weighing in on changing directions on.
So I didn't get a chance to watch all the governor's press conference today, but my understanding is he one of the things that he did say is, anything that the state is doing, certainly, they're not trying to take the jurisdiction over, any other jurisdiction. So if a local, municipality or county wants to do something above and beyond what the state is, we're certainly free to do so. He made that very clear. But what he is doing is, so the stay-at-home order that the state is adopted is going to expire on April 26th. After April 26th, the state is moving from a stay-at-home order to a safer at home policy. And essentially rather than imposing a mandatory stay-at-home order, they're going to allow certain businesses to open up. Restaurants and bars are going to be the last ones to open up, but offices and various retail establishments, provided that they can adopt the social distancing guidelines that the state is requiring, they'll be able to reopen. All of that subject to change based on what the data is showing. And I believe what the governor said is that with stay at home, the state has estimated that we have achieved, collectively 75 to 80% social distancing, whatever that means. And the next threshold for safer at home is 60 to 65% social distancing. And then after a certain period of time, we're going to be moving down towards 50%, and they're going to kind of ratchet it down. Still encouraging people to stay home and to telecommute if you can, but kind of gradually reopen things. It remains to be seen how this actually plays out and what it all means. But the concern that I have is we're already getting to the point of kind of information overload and conflicting messages. And it's going to be really hard, I think, for the general public to understand, what does 60 to 65% social distancing actually mean? And so I certainly don't want to do anything that is going to confuse people and not necessarily, do any good. I think the state has done a good job so far. I think Governor Polis has done a really good job. And I think that it is important for us to be, unified with the governor, provided that they're doing what they need to be doing to properly navigate this pandemic. But to Ken's point, we don't have a public health agency here in Superior, and without actual data for kind of what the situation looks like in Superior, I feel like we're just kind of guessing at what the solution is, and we don't necessarily know what the problem is or what the solution should be. So while I certainly agree that we should do everything that we need to do, I don't think we have the resources to understand what it is that we actually need to do, such that we should be adopting a policy to do something about it. So my preference at this point is to allow the state to implement the policies that they're implementing, continue to pay careful attention to what the state is doing, and looking at what the data is showing. And if there ends up being a little hotspot somewhere in Superior, then we need to reconvene and figure out what it is that we need to do. But before that, I feel like we may be legislating a solution to a problem that isn't necessarily kind of supported by the data here based on what we have.
I guess where my opinion differs on that a little bit is I don't want us to just say, well, we don't have a public health expert in Superior, so therefore, we can't do anything without the data. Data is important, and y'all know I'm a very data-driven person, but there are times when we have to make decisions when we don't have all the answers. And what I would like us to do is consider what are ways that we can better protect our residents based on what we know, perhaps in ways that don't cause big inconvenience. So to go back to that trail example, I don't know that anyone in the world has data that says making sidewalks one way is going to prevent 3% more transmission of COVID. All of this is new to everyone, and those studies just haven't been done. So even the public health experts, in a lot of cases, are kind of making their best judgments and guessing based on what data they do have. I think it's important for us to think about not just the data that's out there, but also what is the impact of it. So something like making trails or sidewalks one way, does that affect our business? No. Does it, how much does it inconvenience our residents versus potentially helping with transmission? No, I don't know that it will 100% save this many people by doing that, but I think we should explore some of those creative solutions, particularly when it's around, to Kevin's point, providing more information to residents, providing some guidance and direction, even if we're not legislating it.
I'll just weigh in on the direction of the paths and so on. I went to the grocery store a day or two ago and discovered after a few aisles that I was going the wrong way down the one-way aisle. And I think it makes sense in a grocery store where you've got alternating directions of one way, and I think that's their nice way to kind of help provide some more distancing. But I can't imagine how we would ever implement this on our trails and on, the sidewalk in front of your street. Do I need to walk around my cul-de-sac to go back to my house? I just don't know where you would start and possibly stop with something like that. So I tend to agree with most of the other conversation around that the state and our county are doing a decent level in providing us and other neighboring communities guidance on this. And I think that's what we need to keep following unless we suddenly feel like it's gone completely off course, which I don't see that happening. And regarding future events, we're just going to have to keep monitoring this on a week by week basis. So much is changing and so frequently. I don't know how we can predict what's going to be possible and what's not. My hunch tells me we're not going to have 4th of July as we've always had it, but that's something staff needs to give us guidance on based on kind of what they're hearing and also what we're hearing at the state level. So I think it's more of a let's monitor, let's provide information as we can to residents, but legislating additional steps, I think it would add to confusion and could add to people just getting angry, and we don't need that. We need people are already kind of anxious as it is with the whole situation, and I don't think we need to add fuel to that fire by telling people they can't walk where they want to in town.
What are thoughts on requiring masks to be worn by anyone in a Superior business?
I also have noticed that some stores are requiring that. Superior Liquor is one that required that. And I think it's a business decision as opposed to, I mean, it's like going to somebody's house and they don't want you wearing shoes inside. Okay, so you either take off your shoes or you irritate them or you leave. And that's kind of the, I think those businesses, yeah, I really think it's up to the business to decide. I don't think we should be legislating that.
Yeah, if I could add, one thing, because I am one of those shoe-free households. The social norms are starting to change. If you go back to when we first closed the playgrounds, there's a lot of folks jumping the line, cutting the line, removing the signs for the first week, and now it's hard to find a single park where somebody is not staying away from the equipment. I think mask culture is a new aspect in the U.S. But for anyone who's traveled in Asia, it's not atypical to see people wearing masks all the time. I think we'll get there. Trying to mandate it, I don't know how you do that. But I think the social norms are already changing quickly. What I'm not in favor of is what I think Mark alluded to last week is the shaming, sort of the social media shaming of people that, don't have a mask or out the mask or whatever. I think we'll get there. And I think we just have to be patient. It's been 10 days since Governor Polis asked us to all wear a mask. And, in the 10 days, I've seen a dramatic increase in people wearing masks all the time. And I think we'll get there. It's just going to take a little more time.
Okay, Sandy, do you have anything? We're already about 30 minutes into this conversation, so we think we need to move on to some other topics. So, Sandy?
Yeah, the only comment I would make is I don't know how we would even begin to enforce one way on the trails. I was like Clint today. I haven't been to the grocery store in about 14 days. So I went today. I had to go to various stores. 90% of the people I saw had masks on. It was rare to not see somebody with a mask on. So I agree with Neil that the social norms are taking over. But the grocery store thing, man, I was 2/3 of the way through the grocery store before I realized there were signs on the, and then I got yelled at. So, I kind of felt bad. But, then I started to follow it. But most other people were not following it. So to try and do it on our trails, we have hundreds of miles of trails in this town. And to even think that we might be able to put a mark at the start where everybody would get on a trail and tell them to go the right way just seems impractical. I walk just about every night, and people are very conscious of being respectful for other people. There are a few people who don't, and because of that, I wear a mask. So I want to continue to trust that the folks in Superior will be respectful of what the standards are. The only concern I continue to have is with the skate park. The number of people that are hanging out at the skate park is unacceptable. There were close to 15 there this afternoon when I went over there. There were adults with them. Matt, if there is any way at all that you can come up with a solution to close the skate park off, I would really appreciate it. It is the only park in town that I see to be a significant problem. And, but short of putting, contadina wire around it, I don't know how we're going to keep people out. And it may be that the people who are violating it are not Superior residents, who knows? But other than that, I do think generally people are doing their best. And, I'm not interested in any more enforcement than we're or any additional rules than what the state and the county have put in place.
So next week, this time next week, the stay-at-home order is going to be lifted, and there's going to be a whole new set of guidelines. And so we're gonna have to pay attention very closely to what other jurisdictions are doing with respect to playgrounds and parks and things. I mean, so does this time next week mean we're opening all that stuff up? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but we need to figure that out in the next week. And I think we also need to be consistent with what other jurisdictions are doing. I'm sure some people are going to say, that's a mistake to open that stuff. If the decision is made to open that stuff up, some people are going to say that's a mistake to open that stuff up. But it's, I think people, like everything else in life, you're just going to have to make decisions. Do I want to potentially expose myself to that? Because the virus hadn't gone anywhere. We've just tamped it down, and we're going to have to continue making all kinds of good decisions to hopefully keep those numbers that well. So any closing remarks on this? Otherwise, let's move on to.
Do we want to discuss the playgrounds now? I mean, we already know that's coming. Of course, information is going to change, and we may need to pivot in the future. But I'm wondering if any of you have thoughts right now on whether we should or shouldn't open the playgrounds.
My thought is we need to take direction from what the state says, any guidance that the state is going to provide on that, and I think that will guide what our county health department and other regional health departments, because the last thing we want to have is us be the only ones with one open, or us be the only ones with one closed, and then people are moving between communities to go get whatever recreation they want that's not available or is available, and that's what we don't want, is unnecessary movement of people. So I think we may have a situation where playgrounds, parks open back up, and some people don't like that, but to me, it's more about being consistent with what is going on around you, so that you don't have unnecessary movement of people.
Others?
I think it's the status quo until we learn something different.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we trust Matt for, the playground structures themselves, as I think I said in an email. We as a community open up those structures. We as a community can make the decision to close down those structures. And I think at this point, we made the right decisions, consistent with other communities, consistent with the county. And if next week, hopefully not next year, next week, there's data and we see other communities, then I think we think about it. And maybe I don't know what it looks like. Maybe it's with additional signage. Maybe it's with, who knows what it looks like, but it would be, it's kind of premature to talk about it right now, I think. I think it's a relatively good policy, and I kind of like what we've done. I mean, Sandy, it saddens me. I haven't been to the skate park in a while. It saddens me to hear that so many people are continuing to use the skate park. I think we continue to redouble our efforts with signage, but I'm not interested in barbed wire fencing, or frankly what other communities have done, which is dump in stuff into the bowl, so makes it so it's not used. I think I'm seeing many other communities far overreach, and I don't want to be one of those communities that are overreaching. But at the same time, I trust Matt to make those decisions, provide appropriate guidance to staff, and I think the guidance to Matt is, we're going to try to align with other communities, which is, the right decision from my point of view.
Okay, all right, let's move on to just go back to the agenda item A, which is park programming. This is a discussion about the size and scope of events to occur in parks, charge for rentals of parks, and insurance requirements for liquor licenses for events. Mark, I know you had, maybe you wanted to speak to the liquor license piece of this, since I know had an experience with this and kind of have some thoughts on the liquor license piece of this, and I'll just let others weigh in as needed.
Sure. So we rented Wildflower Park for a essentially like a second grade, meet the parents and kids can play around in the park. And we wanted to get a liquor license associated with that on a Friday night. One of the things that we found when we went through that process was that, so we require here in Superior a liquor license for essentially what is like a barbecue. Like, so if you're going to have like a party in a park, we require a liquor license. Other jurisdictions like Denver do not. That's just kind of covered by your homeowners associate, your homeowners policy that you would have on your house, that you're just having a barbecue in a park, and you're not required to get a standalone liquor license. So essentially what we have here in Superior is it's like a special event. So there's no difference in, according to our code, when somebody has just a barbecue with alcohol and they're not charging it, or they're hosting a concert and they're charging admission and selling beer. It's basically the same liquor license. And to me, like, going through that process, I don't think that that's what we intended. I definitely see a difference between bringing certainly for-profit charging for alcohol and having like a massive event versus having just a community gathering, a wedding or something like that. Like, I don't know if we necessarily need to have something so formal. And the consequence of it was that the actual insurance policy was really expensive to get. We ended up purchasing a one-day policy, but even the insurance carriers were just like, wow, this is the sort of thing that we sell for people who are having concerts, not a barbecue in a park. So when I brought it up several months ago, the discussion was, do we want to have that sort of policy in our books, or do we want to draw a distinction between having a social gathering, a barbecue type event versus having a special event, concert type event where you're going to be selling liquor.
Matt, could you maybe speak to kind of why we have the license requirement that we do, and maybe staff's thoughts on whether or not it should be changed?
Yeah, and I'll ask Dan for his thoughts on this as well. But I think if the board's interested in having a separate, distinct requirement for smaller groups, residents just hosting their family and a few friends, I think we can work with the attorney's office to come up with something and bring it forward for the board to consider if there's support for that. And I think it makes sense. We want to make sure that if people are in the parks, even if it's a small group, family and a few friends or just family, and they have alcohol, that they've gotten the proper permit to use that. And so if sheriff deputy comes by and says, hey, what are you doing in the park with alcohol, you'll have something to show them. So I think if there's support from the board for that, we can work with the attorney's office to put something together.
And the point was, it's not necessarily the getting the liquor license permit from the board. That part wasn't the expensive and time consuming part. It was the actual getting the insurance coverage, which was required by our permit. So like I think what would make sense would be, we're still going to require a liquor permit from the town if you're going to have a barbecue with liquor, and you do your little diagram and say, this is how I'm going to prevent people who are underage from getting served. It just seems to me that it's overkill to require a separate insurance policy for those types of events versus something more significant like a concert.
Yeah, and I can weigh in on that. I think it would be, we do have municipalities where there is a distinction. I think in terms of the insurance requirement, it might be something just to run by the town's insurance to make sure there's not any type of issue if we do end up drafting, a new ordinance kind of making that distinction. But my initial reaction is it seems like it would be all right.
And Dan, I appreciate you saying that. That was going to be my first question, is whether or not this impacts our insurance rates, or whether it impacts just our insurance coverage in any way. If we all that, I personally am in favor of making any type of common sense adjustment we can. I think it's fine to let our residents drink alcohol at our parks as long as they come to us for a permit and they provide all the requisite information that we require to get that temporary 1-day permit. If we can waive or alter the different types of requirements that Mark mentioned to something that is a bit more reasonable without impacting our legal liability and putting the town at undue legal risk, I think that would be appropriate. But before I could make a firm decision, I would need to better understand how the decision we're making here impacts us both liability wise, if somebody were to get hurt or somebody were to get in a car and get into a heaven forbid, an accident that kills somebody, and what it would do to our insurance coverage overall.
Yeah, and you know, generally, obviously, our advice would be is insurance is always a good thing to provide. So, but you know, it might be just something to bring up to the insurance company, kind of with a list of questions, and see what kind of effect this would have on their coverage.
Yeah.
And I'm fully in favor of simplifying it. I had to go back through my emails, and we had a string back in August where this got placed on the subsequent board retreat, which hasn't managed to come to fruition for about 8 months. But I think this was part of the macro conversation around park programming, because as much as a small 15 people event, I think let's streamline that as much as possible. I think part of the other question was, if we've got a potential event for 300 people that's organized by a Superior resident, how does our current permitting sort of manifest itself with a group that large? Because there isn't a distinction in terms of, so I guess cost of the rental if it's a Superior resident that's renting it for. And I think this back in August, it was the hockey team from the sports stable that wanted to use the facility. So if we are going to draft some new rules, I don't know how we sort of couch it relative to size of party, so to speak. I don't know if there's a way to do that. Dan, I don't know what other municipalities have done, because I think, where Mark's coming from makes total sense if it's a small group gathering. But, right now, the way that our park reservation system works, and Matt, keep me honest here, if you're a resident, we don't have a distinction in terms of the size of party that you're going to have. And maybe we do on the liquor license. I've never looked at that before, but, I think we just have to be careful in terms of, let's address the actual issue here, but let's be careful that we don't create another problem for larger events that, are organized by some of our residents, not necessarily concert size, but still significantly greater than what, we're talking about here too.
Yeah, and I can certainly take a look at how we've kind of done it for other municipalities. I would think that you could probably set some kind of, limitations to the size of party, but if that was something that, the town wanted to move forward with, we could certainly provide some options as to, how to do that.
Yeah, I think this discussion is coming out of a couple of events that happened in Purple Park, the Frisbee disc golf tournament, and then the sports stable had an event there at Purple Park. And we have some pretty large events at Community Park, Chili Fest, and our 4th of July parade. So I think it's wanting to know from the board if you have a direction or desire to move forward with setting up parameters for Purple Park, Wildflower Park, Founders Park, those type of parks, maybe not Community Park, or it could be Community Park as well, that, limit the number of people in an event. And if it gets to if it goes over that threshold, then it has to seek board approval for anything over X number of people that's being requested.
Well, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. The board's approving all liquor licenses anyway, right? Even if
Right.
it's so it's on the agenda.
Right.
So I appreciate Mark bringing this to us. I've never applied for a liquor license because I never had a party, not because anyway. I'm fully supportive of more common sense rules, so it's not hard and fast that if you're a resident and want to involve a few neighbors or parents of your school your kids' school friends, of course it makes complete common sense that we're overly restrictive and we should look at more common sense type regulations. Having said that, we still will have an opportunity to review every liquor license. And if somebody is trying to abuse those common sense regulations, and we get somebody that does not live in town, that is having a party for 100 people, and I don't know what the number is, if it's 50 people, 100 people, or 200 people, then we're going to pull the liquor license. I'm personally going to pull the liquor license because I look at them all the time. And I'm going to ask some specific questions, and we may consider putting in some additional requirements, including some additional insurance requirements. So I'm fine with just the high level guidance to direct staff to seek more common sense regulations for, small gatherings that require a liquor license because they're in a park or public setting or whatever. But knowing that each of those liquor license permit requests will be evaluated by the board. And if there's one that we're not comfortable with, we've learned historically that we could evaluate each application on its merit, and we could put some additional requirements, which will include some additional insurance requirements. I'm cool with that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's really a problem with the policy of actually getting the liquor license approved by the board. And I agree with you, Kevin, that, maybe on a case by case basis, it's the fact that in our liquor license that is issued, there is that requirement that's just a default that says you must have a special event policy. And then when you go to buy it, it's $500, and you're going to have like a barbecue for 2 hours, 3 hours, and you got to spend $500 for insurance when the liquor license itself was only $50.
And I think my point is, I think we should relax that policy. No, and there we go. We should relax that policy. But if somebody is pushing the envelope, and it's, it obviously makes sense for a known member of the community to have, that's having 20 people, that they're not going to have that special that special insurance rider. But if somebody is not from our community, they're not a known entity, or they've had a party in the past, or there's something in the application that's not giving somebody, the appropriate support, then we should require that special insurance rider. And there's nothing, Dan, forgive me, keep me honest, but there's nothing that would prevent us from doing that. I mean, we have given conditional approval on liquor licenses in the past, and I think we would give a conditioned approval of a liquor license in an event that requiring some additional insurance rider for a special event permit. And so that was what I was trying to say, Mark. Sorry.
Okay. Kevin, I hear where you're coming from, but one of the challenges is if we want our parks to get used, we have to provide folks some aspect of knowing beforehand, right? If you take the hockey event, it didn't, I'm not sure what happened with the timing, but they came to us a week before they're having their event, so trying to land a policy that we have prescribed that night, prior to that Saturday, makes it extraordinarily difficult to pull off, an event of that size. So, if we want, people to use our parks, then I think we need to be more prescriptive in the permitting process itself, rather than let the board be the choke point to reevaluate or second guess a decision that we could have just put into the code.
I think part of the challenge with that particular event, Neil, was just the timing of when the application comes in versus when the board is meeting. And
right.
So if we weren't meeting for a couple of weeks and then the application just has to sit there until we're meeting again, that's, I think, why it came to us with such a short runway on getting that approved. But I tend to agree with you. I don't think we want somebody to kind of have to guess whether their ability to serve alcohol is going to be potentially squashed a week before the event, and that really kind of puts.
I actually don't think. Maybe I'm the minority here. I did go for a run or a bike ride before that event, but that event is a good example of something that I think is beyond the purpose of our community parks. I think our community parks are intended for families having a barbecue and the occasional graduation, and the less frequent wedding reception for somebody whose home backs up there, or engagement party. I think businesses that are trying to rent out our parks to have parties and this was a business, should be prepared and understand that we might say no. I mean, we all work for companies and have events teams. Trying to think that, you know, you do not have your event, the permit for your event, if it includes liquor, lined up until even 4 or 6 weeks before the event is careless, reckless.
No, so let me
These people should be
clarify,
planning
Kevin. No,
months.
Kevin, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that. What I'm saying is if we as a board prescribe a secondary insurance requirement, that's not easy to get overnight. You know, I think the conversation around the liquor license itself is what it is. But if we want to require them to get additional insurance, there's a significant amount of lead time to sort of land some of those policies. It's not, you know, a 2-day process where you click online and you get it. It's cumbersome, and it's not impossible. And I don't disagree with you. I don't think that Purple Park was the right place for that event. You know, we got backed into a corner as a board because we hadn't met and we had to sort of, you know, approve it when we did. And personally, I don't think we should be in that position, but we got put into that position. And if we can, you know, if we want to sort of put some guardrails or some boundaries on, you know, the size of event, and, you know, up to this event, you don't need insurance, and beyond this event, you do need insurance. I think we help ourselves by documenting that, rather than leaving it uncertain so that someone comes to us with, you know, an 80 people event. We meet a week before the event and we tell them, you need to go get this policy, and they have no way of getting it.
But
And
the
so,
other-
and so the problem is that the way the application is drafted right now, you need to obtain the insurance before you submit the application. So you need to pay, you know, the premium for the insurance policy, and then submit the application to the town. And you're like, well, I hope I get it. And I don't think that the insurance company would probably just refund that policy. They'll be like, sorry, it's non-refundable.
Mark, I'll go out on a limb and say you're probably the first resident. I'm sure the businesses that rented the parks, but you're probably the first resident that's ever read which is a good thing. I mean, that's not a good thing you're the first, but it's a good thing that you did what you did. The first resident that actually read it and complied with the insurance request, because it's, you know, what you're asking for and what I'm supportive of are common sense policies for residents who want to use the parks for what they're intended, which is neighborhood gatherings in the casual class of wine. We should absolutely have common sense policies for that. But I'm going to stick to it to say, if I'm seeing an application, I don't care if the party's the following Saturday. If I don't like that application and I feel compelled to put some additional requirements before I personally approve that application, I'm going to do so. And if the community doesn't like it, they could, or the applicant doesn't like it, then I will either vote no, and you can join me, or that applicant can go to another community without those rules. But I'm not going to approve liquor licenses. I'm going to review every single one. And if there's something I don't like, I'm going to ask questions and put additional requirements if that's what it comes to be. And I don't think we're ever going to have a hard and fast rule.
To me, it sounds like the big issues are around both the lead time as well as the expectation. And I'm wondering if this could just be solved with some communication that says, if your liquor license is going to be for an event of 20 people or more, and we can discuss what that number is, it must be submitted at least 30 days prior to the event. And you should be prepared that as a condition of approval, the board may require you to get this type of insurance. You know, we recommend that you look into that in advance, because to Neil's point, I think it's not that, so that insurance isn't quick to get, but there's a lot of upfront work that people can do prior to actually paying the $500 fee or whatever it is. You know, you can get in touch with an insurance agent, you can get, you know, here's what it's going to cost, I need to sign this paper, and you can wait to sign the paper until after the board meeting. I think, and if people aren't reading that part of the application, well, then their application might get denied, and or we might approve it 5 days before the event and they don't have enough time, and that's on them at that point. But I think if we were to set the tone by saying, you know, must be submitted with 30 days notice, and be prepared that you're going to need this and that you may need this insurance, I think we cover all our bases.
Yeah, I think there are those timeframes already indicated on the application. So I think the common sense simplifications to insurance requirements for small gatherings, I think that makes sense, and directionally I think that's where staff's going to go. The other biggie I think we need to tackle on this, and we need to wrap this up fairly quickly too. But and we touched on this briefly, but the larger event, the non-alcohol larger events, a la Frisbee disc golf tournament, that takes it's a big impact on the park, and it's for days. And I think the first time around we didn't, we got a little pushback on it, but this most recent time seemed like there was a little bit more pushback on it. And so, I mean, Kevin, you kind of touched on this earlier about, if it's a business, maybe a higher level of scrutiny. But this is a non-alcohol event, so we're not going to see a permit come through. So I think the question that staff has is how much, if any, involvement from the board needs to happen to approve or not these larger events.
Yeah, and I think kind of the way to approach this might be, that we could draft an ordinance that makes a distinction. We also need to make sure that it's consistent with the liquor code as well. But kind of I think the distinction could be based on, the amount of people that are at an event, whether there's alcohol that's being served. And then we kind of have to cross-check that with the liquor code. And then I think another aspect of that is to also check with the insurance company to see whether some kind of change in the town's policy will have any effect on coverage. That's kind of the way I'm seeing, kind of moving forward on this, if this is something that the town would like to look into.
Yeah, agreed on that. But I was just talking about the non-liquor events. I mean,
Right.
this disc golf event there's no liquor piece to it at all. This was just a group that rented our parks for a period of several days. Some residents adjacent to it pushed back because they can't use their park. So the question for our board is, do we want to have future approval requirements of those events, not allow them at all? I personally, I think they are a neat thing to kind of bring people into your community, and if it's properly run, which I think it has been properly run, I like it. I think it was a good use of the event, but I also get it that at a certain point it kind of becomes a little too much of a good and fun thing, and maybe there needs to be some bigger guardrails on that.
So,
Well, the question is, do we want to have the board asked yay or nay on those types of applications, or the current policy, which is to just defer that to staff, right? So that's, if we're going to have an event over a certain number of people, do we want to have a policy that says that question must come to the board before it gets approved or not?
well,
Correct.
and I think as I was preparing for this and thinking through this question, I think there's 3 different buckets that we can basically put these types of applications in. You've got the types of buckets that Kevin was relating to earlier, where you've got your small neighborhood type gatherings, where you've got maybe 10, 20, maybe upwards to 50 people tops, like maybe a celebration of some sort. That is a community use of our park, and I think that is appropriate. I think we start to cross a barrier into a second bucket when you're talking about private businesses who are trying to throw a party. I don't think that is necessarily a good use of our parks, and it certainly shouldn't be a use of our parks at the rate that it is. There should be a substantial barrier to using our parks as grand event spaces. So I think there's that second bucket. Now, the third bucket that I'm envisioning is probably where this disc golf event would lie, and it's where you have an actual event that comes in, and it provides a benefit to Superior as a whole. I mean, the disc golf community came in, the organizers held clinics. It was something that's fun to watch. It's incredibly unique. There is a benefit to the entire community there, and I think we should continue to treat those applications in the same way we treat all events. We don't have every event come to us for approval. It is within Matt's domain of approval, and I think that's where that stays. So in my mind, what makes sense to come to us is that second bucket. If there's we either continue with our current application process and the applications for events that are 100 people or more that are private events, sure, those come to us, or we just add a really high cost barrier, and then maybe it doesn't have to come to us. But otherwise, I would leave events like Frisbee golf within Matt's domain. And if he thinks, in his professional judgment, that this is no longer appropriate for Superior, or it's going beyond what what Superior can handle, then he can bring that to us, and we can have that discussion. But I'm not interested in adding that additional layer for those types of
So
events.
Ken, all right, if I respond. So I like how you chunked it up into buckets, and I agree just that the celebrations usually involve alcohol. So we're always going to see your second bucket was the celebration, and alcohol is always going to come to us. But I hear what you mean. That's, from the permitting of the event itself, I'm not interested in knowing, but we'll know because we have to around the liquor license, which is usually going to accompany a celebration. From that, for me, the difference between Frisbee golf and an event that rented out the if they rented out Williams Field or something else that was very rentable on the menu, we don't have, this was an exception. The Frisbee golf was an exception based rental. We want to come in and borrow your community park and use your restrooms and bring up and put up some special tents, and it was a special use. And so in the Frisbee golf example, I personally would appreciate having the opportunity to say thumbs up or thumbs down. That's something I want to support. And I'm not prepared to talk about Frisbee golf today, but I see that as a slight difference between, some other event, some commercial event where somebody wants to host a softball tournament on our baseball fields. Of course, I don't want to weigh in whether or not if it's available and they're paying the price, they should be able to come and they should have that permit. But your bucket 3 was different for me. It's like a bucket 3A and a 3B. 3A, normal on the menu fields. 3B, off the menu fields. On the menu, I don't need to see. Off menu, which I believe is what the Frisbee golf was, I do want to see personally.
So the only, and Kevin, I was with you initially until I started thinking through the implications of that, and where I switched my opinion was, where do you draw the line? I mean, for instance, the Superior Morgul, they come through. There's Superior uses or roads that get used. It impacts our community. I put that in a very similar bucket as the disc golf, but that doesn't come to us for approval. I mean, this is just I was using Frisbee golf as an example, but I mean, clearly there's going to be others, and I don't necessarily want administrative type decisions coming back to the board 5, 6, 7, 8 times a year. I don't know how many of these events are occurring. I'm just throwing a number out there, but I was trying to stay away from administrative type decisions versus the actual legislative and policy decisions that really deserve our time and attention, especially, and we've got another agenda item on the menu coming up here about meeting efficiency. So is this really the best use of our time? And that's where I think you and I differed there.
Okay.
I'll just add my 2 cents to the original question, because I think this is, I'd asked to this get on the retreat agenda months ago. I do think, at least something like disc golf is a great event. And the first time the Morgul Bismarck came through, the board definitely discussed it. And as it became more of a run rate or regular sort of occurrence, it kind of moved in the administrative bucket. So if we're looking at something new or an infrequent usage, I think it should come to the board, especially if it's a multi-day or, temporary permanent infrastructure going in. Like with the ball fields, existing infrastructure, multi-day, there's no disruption. But, if someone's going to be using Purple Park for 4 days, they're putting up tents, they're going to stay there for 3 days, then yeah, it probably should come to the board the first time around. Let's get some public opinion. Let's, discuss it. But if we're in year 3, 4, or 5, I mean, it's definitely an administrative activity that Matt can oversee and manage on his own. Because I do want more people to get exposed to this town. I mean, the feedback I heard from a lot of the disc golfers was this is one of their favorite courses everywhere. These are folks that road trip across the country, and they really like this course. So the more that we can get on the radar of places like that, the better it is for the town. As long as we get to, opine on it the first couple times, and then after that, just let staff run it as they do everything else.
I would agree with that. Others?
Yeah, I guess my general feel is anything that is new and really significant in terms of just the general impact to the community, like the community is going to be like, wait, all of a sudden, like the roads are closed for a weekend. That's the sort of thing that I think needs to come to the board's attention, not necessarily for an up and down vote, but at a minimum, just to have the public aware before the event is actually happening. Potentially then we could say this needs to come for a vote, but I think anything where we're going to have like a significant disruption, then, that's the sort of thing that I would like at least to have the opportunity to hear about before it's happening. So it's just not a surprise, because what I don't like to hear is angry residents saying, why the hell did you guys do such and such? And then have to look through agendas and say, well, when did we consider that? And then find out that we didn't consider it. And then all of a sudden it was a surprise to me as much as it's a surprise to them. But when we have a history, a track record with, an event that, they've shown that they can be respectful of our property and it's something that the community actually likes, I don't think that we necessarily need to weigh in on it. But I guess it's really the new and potentially disruptive events that I think we just need to do a better job of having some communication about it with the community and potentially weighing in on it as a board.
Okay, anyone else? All right. Okay, Matt, do you feel like you got enough direction for you and staff to go on these items?
Yeah, I'll work with the attorneys and Leslie's staff based on the discussion.
Okay, very good. All right, the next on our agenda is board liaison attendance, discussion of whether board liaisons are required to attend committee meetings. Was there did someone in particular request this? Or Matt, do you want to start with this?
Yeah, this was a request I received to add basically it was just with the board's stated position of attending the committees as committee meetings as liaisons and being there to answer any questions that might come up. The question was, is this good use of board members' time considering all the other meetings and activities that you as board members have to attend in a week or a month? And
Matt and Clint, I think between Laura and I, it might have been one of us that got it inserted in the agenda. And some of the background here is a library, the Louisville Library Board of Trustees typically has had Louisville City Council member on it. But what they've decided with 2020 is that there's too many committees to support their continued sort of in-person meeting attendance. So what has happened, at least in Louisville, is the committees will come and report out to the board once or twice a year. So we are talking about the library a little bit later. So I think this has some ramifications there because I'm not happy with the direction there. But I think Louisville has acknowledged the fact that given the number of committees they have, and I think it's around 30, maybe 25, that for the city council they've got to dial back their level of involvement. My personal feeling here, at least for Superior, is amongst the 6 committees that we have, I think we're well supported. I actually really enjoy attending the ProStack and the other meetings because I think the members really do derive a fair amount of benefit of having us there. I'm still a little disappointed that we've taken away the dinners because I think that has continued, or it did provide a good opportunity for the entire committee to hear directly from the board. That said, I'm a strong believer that we need to continue our in-presence support for the Superior committees that we have.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I mean, I think, in my opinion, even beyond what Louisville is doing, what I'm seeing as I go to the committee meetings is, we really are there to answer questions. We're not there to insert our opinions. I know we've talked about that as a board before. So if our true purpose is to answer questions, what I'm seeing is there just aren't that many questions. And typically the questions that we do have are those that can be answered by the staff liaison. Now, in the committee meetings I've attended, the staff liaisons have always been extremely respectful and saying, oh, Laura, why don't you go ahead and answer that? But I know they know the answer as well. And I think if we are really that concerned that there will be a question, well, and to that end, when the committee says, what does the board think of this? My response is always, I can tell you what I think of it, but I certainly can't speak on behalf of the rest of the board here. So I think when you look at all of that, I think we need to stay abreast of what the committees are doing, certainly, and we need to be able to weigh in from time to time, but I don't know that we need to go physically sit in the entire meeting for the one question that comes up every 2 meetings or so.
And I think there's just a difference in the meetings, right? I mean, with ProStack, you know, once a month I get at least a dozen questions, right? You know, I think the committees operate a little bit differently. They're looking for guidance on different things. So I think it is probably committee specific. You know, I think with ProStack, they're always looking at what's happening with, you know, various aspects of development, various aspects of master planning, budgets, and so on and so forth. So those are questions that, you know, staff can answer, but a lot of it also, you know, to some degree devolves back to what does a board think, where, you know, like Laura said, you know, I can answer for myself, which I think is still, you know, direction that they wouldn't have otherwise. So, you know, even as one among 7, it is still input that they wouldn't get if we weren't there. So, you know, we had our first Zoom meeting last week. I think it went really well. You know, I think the presence that I had, I think that it helps ProStack and it helps some of our other committees. So, you know, irrespective of what, you know, ultimately our board decides, I'm going to continue to want to attend the meetings in person because I think that, you know, there's a benefit for me and there's a benefit to the committee.
Well, and I think beyond that, for me, there's also the, and I'll preface this with on ACEs, I have more of a similar experience that Neil just described rather than you, Laura, what you just described. I get a number of questions through the meeting and am able to add significant context around questions and discussion items that they have that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. And Karen Snortland is the staff liaison for ACEs and does a fantastic job. And I'm sure she could probably answer the majority, if not everything I speak as well. But the other part of it that I'm concerned about is what are the messages that we're sending to our resident or our committee members right now. We have taken the dinner off the table, so we don't meet with them annually anymore. And now we're talking about not even attending their meetings. I think we're sending a message, even having this discussion, that we are devaluing their opinions and their work that they're doing for us. And whether that's an intentional, which I'm sure it's not, message, it is what's going to be perceived. And it's not a road that I'm willing to go down at this point.
It's funny that you say that, Ken, because I kind of view it from the exact opposite. Like I kind of view like we're chaperoning their committee meetings, and like I don't think that they necessarily need us there. Like they're totally capable of having productive and effective meetings without board attendance. And if they needed to have questions answered, they could certainly reach out. They have staff there. And I don't think that they necessarily need the level of handholding. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this policy, was implemented, back, before all of us were on the board, with prior boards who, frankly had a lot of people were not working. They didn't have, young families at home. They had the time and the ability to attend these meetings with a little less of a kind of disruption to their, working lives than the current board is. And, if that's the policy that we want to continue, that's fine. But it should be something that is like an intentional one and not just like a legacy policy, a holdover from, previous boards who, frankly, really wanted to attend all of those meetings and felt that that was important because they felt that they needed to, kind of be aware of what was going on in those meetings and also add their input to it. So, I'm kind of fine with whatever direction we're going in, but I just think that it should be, our policy and not just something that is inadvertently carried on just because it's, what we've always been doing, at least for the recent past. Personally, I don't think that the committees would be offended if we weren't there. And, I think we're all busy, and opening up our schedules a little time to avoid having the need to go to a meeting would be something that I'd be supportive of. We certainly are capable of going to any of the meetings that we want to. They're open to the public, but just mandating that you need to attend it just strikes me as unnecessary.
Well, I think I'm going to disagree a little bit. I don't think that the board members started going to the committee meetings for any reason other than to increase liaison between the board and the committees. I mean, I don't think it was because anybody particularly thought anybody was doing anything right or wrong or anything. It was just to show that we were interested, engaged in the work of the committees. The second thing is we got rid of the dinners because it became an arbitrary date where the committees had to come in and talk to us. And what we did was we changed it so that the committees there was sort of a standing place on the board agenda where committees could come in and talk with us instead of having at any time during the year that they needed to. I mean, there's time on the agenda to do that. So rather than having the arbitrary once a year dinner. So I don't think we've in any way sent a message one way or the other to the committees. We're just changing the way we do business. Going to one meeting a month for OSAC is actually, I don't find it cumbersome. It's literally 2 hours out of the, thousands of hours in a month. And so for me, it's worth it to be a resource. And, I've learned a lot more about the operations of OSAC, and I think it's been valuable. And I would not support us doing away with committee liaisons. The other thing is, I think there's value in having a liaison because then you don't always necessarily have the committees not knowing who to go to, to be their resource.
First, let me start. I wish my months were as long as Sandy's because hers have thousands of hours, mine have hundreds of hours, but that's all right. Listen, I could see the eye roll, Sandy. I was teasing.
Sorry, I didn't have the calculator in front of me. And I'm an accountant and I don't do math in my head.
So I think it's a healthy dialogue. I think everybody's going to have a different point of view, and the words, somebody used the word mandate. I don't remember who it was. There's nothing. If we don't have our committee, I personally think it's a best practice to have somebody there. Other committees need a liaison more than some committees, and that's certainly understandable. I think it's a best practice to have somebody there. We've certainly had lots of committee meetings, including committees that I've been the liaison to, where we have not had somebody. We don't send people home if that's the case. The meetings continue. Sometimes the meetings are better, sometimes the meetings are worse, but they're still meetings. We still have volunteers. And I think it's a good best practice. And if you're the committee liaison and you think that you're not necessary, then you should occasionally skip a meeting, or when you show up, bring your regular work and do some multitasking and be available to answer a question. But, I think it's a healthy dialogue. I appreciate this conversation. I don't think we should try to fix what ain't broken. We only have 6, maybe 7, if you count Clint stuff and consortium and some other things, you could probably count 10 or 11. But I personally think it's the best practice to have a liaison on, and we should keep it as is. But there's nothing that to my knowledge, that quote mandates attendance, nor should there be, nor would I want a board policy to say we're going to abandon them, because I think that would almost be, to me, feel like we're abandoning the committees, which, despite the fact you guys know I'm not a huge fan of a lot of these committees. The committees, not the committees themselves, the structure. I think it sets them up, sets expectations. But I think when you have the liaison, we're better at managing the appropriateness of the expectations. So I'd like to keep it as is, no change.
Okay, yeah, good comments, and I would agree with that. I think it's best practice to attend if you can, and um, keep them going and provide that valuable feedback to the board and feedback to the committees when available. So, anyone have anything further on this? Okay, let's go on to short-term rentals discussion, whether any licensing or regulations are needed by the town to regulate short-term rentals. Let's see.
So I'm,
Ken, go ahead.
yeah, I think I might have been the person who asked for this to be on the agenda a month or two ago. And prior to COVID-19, there was a plan to have a discussion of Boulder County consortiums of city meetings uh, to discuss best practices in this area, and it probably could have brought back to the town to discuss a path forward that makes sense. I know many of our neighboring municipalities are causing or requiring licensing programs, and some of the other ones aren't. But the ones that don't have regulations and restrictions around it are the same folks that are at the consortium meetings that are just as concerned as I think some of our residents are. And there's also the question, I don't think this impacts us, but some of the other municipalities, or at least not to the same extent, but there's other municipalities that are concerned about how these short-term rentals are killing their hotel revenue stream, and that we have occupancy taxes on hotels but not on short-term rentals. I think that's a bit more into the weeds than a high-level conversation we probably need to start with. But from my perspective, we've now heard from at least a few different residents in town who have been negatively impacted by their neighbors that do use short-term rentals for their properties. And I think setting standards and expectations that the community can agree to, that way there's a kind of a rules for the road and a roadmap for how this will work, makes a lot of sense. And I think it would be valuable for us to go down that path and figure out what makes sense for Superior.
This has come up a couple of times over the years that I've been on the board, and it's, at least on all the prior discussions, it's never kind of gone to the point where we felt like we needed to take action. It seems like that. I mean, the majority of our housing is in Rock Creek, and Rock Creek has developed this policy at the HOA about approval of short-term rentals, and presumably they could enforce that when they're not in compliance. I think that's the challenge that people are experiencing, is that maybe they've approved one and it's kind of getting outside of the bounds of what it should be, and then there's the enforcement issue that they're having trouble with, and they're probably looking to us to, well, can you backfill that enforcement issue?
And are you aware of, have they ever approved a short-term rental, the HOA? I asked the question and I thought I got the answer of no.
Yes, yeah, they monitor, they have requirements as part of their covenants for short-term rentals. And I think what's happened is in the past, a previous board has been more active in monitoring short-term rentals and enforcing, making sure that the homeowners go through the HOA and get HOA approval. I think the new board, the current HOA board, hasn't taken as such of an active role, and that's part of the reason that you're starting to hear some complaints from residents.
So, okay, that's interesting. That's news to me that I'd like to know a list, Matt, this is a request for you, of the short-term rentals that have been approved by the HOA within Rock Creek. Just as, I mean, I suppose I could ask the question and I'd answer it, but as the liaison, it'd be helpful if you could ask that question.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a expectation that I made an active choice to move into an HOA when I've lived here for 15 years, so certainly almost 15 years. So there was certainly no Airbnb, nor could anybody have predicted an Airbnb when I moved in. But my expectation as part of an HOA is stuff like this doesn't exist. And I, as a resident, less as a trustee, have an expectation for them to enforce that. So I personally, I will, say it in this meeting, I will not support any HOA board member who supports a short-term rental without exception. With regard to me as a trustee, I do not think that this should be a priority for the board to try to legislate. I think this is something that should be done at the HOA level. And if the HOA can't get their job, then we should liaise with the HOA to backfill them and help them get their job, help them do their job. But to me, this is an HOA issue, 100%.
But this would also become an issue for the whole town. I mean, we've got a whole downtown that's getting built, and you know, the question, I'm sure this question, as more and more of those houses get filled, and this will become more and more of an issue for them. And so, you know, anything we would do or not do with Rock Creek HOA has no bearing on downtown or, you know,
Right,
a couple of other
I understand,
places.
but it just goes to the priority and the solving a problem that exists or doesn't exist. And I've not heard any, you know, we've all, because we get emails, we've all looked under Airbnb and VRBO and other places for what's available. I'm not aware of any Airbnbs or VRBOs any place besides Rock Creek. We haven't received any complaints, to my knowledge, outside of Rock Creek. We've also, over the years, and this is before the current board, but in the previous board, we did get some memos, and it is surprisingly difficult for communities to legislate around short-term rentals. But HOAs have the ability to manage and provide permits and approvals. And so that's why, you know, I'm not sure I want to enter the waters of spending money on legal fees and board priorities for a problem that I don't think exists outside of Rock Creek. Tell me it exists outside of Rock Creek and I'll make it a priority, but I've not heard a single instance of it existing.
So it sounds like there might be information that not all of us received or are privy to. Matt or Dan, could you guys send whatever legal memos Kevin is referencing? That way we're all working from the same sheet of music. Just looking at Airbnb right now, there's already 4 Airbnb locations in downtown Superior. There's 6+ over in Original Town in Sagamore. As we build out, it is going to become a bigger issue. And yeah, I don't know that it's something we need to be talking about what's the structure of policies tonight, but maybe once we can all see these legal memos and have a better understanding of what those different barriers are that you're referencing, I'll at least be able to have a more informed discussion, because I'm more concerned about a town-wide policy rather than just Rock Creek.
I completely agree with Ken on this. I would definitely like to see kind of what limitations we have, but I would really prefer that we set these expectations sooner rather than later. Kevin, to your point, when you moved into Rock Creek, you knew that you were buying into an HOA. I want to make sure that as residents are buying in downtown Superior, they understand what potential limitations there may or may not be on short-term rentals. I think it's only fair to those residents. Otherwise, you know, we might have people who are buying with an expectation that they will or won't have short-term rentals and then are surprised down the line. So I'd rather make this decision sooner rather than later.
Sure, and I can certainly send along any previous memo that we've done. I know this is a big issue for a lot of our clients, so we've definitely have a number of memos that give kind of an overview of this. You know, it's kind of off the top of my head. I mean, it would kind of come down to the type of scheme that the town would want, you know, whether it be kind of more of a full force thing like Denver, where there's licensing and regulations, you know, or it'd be more of an option like we've used for some of our mountain town clients, which would be kind of a registration by owner, you know, requiring a local property manager to be responsive in a certain amount of time. So, I mean, I think there's kind of a different kind of standards and scheme that we kind of suggest, but I can certainly find a memo that we've done previously or put one together with one of the ones that we've done for our other clients.
Okay, anyone else?
I guess my general take on this is just, it doesn't seem like it's a problem right now. And I'm, generally reluctant to start tinkering with our code if we don't have a compelling need to do so. I think the HOA in Rock Creek has a policy that it's their responsibility to enforce. And I'm not hearing a lot of complaints from residents that they're not doing so, and that this is a problem in any other section of town that doesn't have the Rock Creek HOA, covenants that are applying to it. So I'm not convinced that there needs to be any action on our part on this issue at this time.
Okay, I tend to agree with that, and that's kind of the conclusion we've come to on several previous discussions on this. And I mean, it's something that tends to kind of rear its head every now and then, but it's not a. It doesn't seem like it should be a major priority. So, okay. But I do think as more time goes by, there's a larger body of knowledge from what other municipalities are doing. So I think the one benefit from perhaps attacking this later is that there will be more and more models of what other municipalities are doing and more experience with it, and we can kind of use the best practices there instead of trying to figure all of this out from scratch. So, okay, we'll move on to item D, which is discussion of tobacco ordinance.
Clint, before we kick this one off, would now, since we're halfway through, be a good time for us to take a quick break?
Sure.
Or do we want to wait another item? I'm not picky.
I'm fine. We're between items now, so why don't we take a 5-minute break? Okay, 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Matt, can I ask a non-agenda housekeeping item, or do we lose him?
Yeah, go ahead.
So as this is recorded, are we recording, is it just the audio, or is there a visual recording as well? How does that work?
Yeah, Martin and I had the discussion. There is just visual or audio. I'm sorry, but staff was looking into see if there was a way to do.
Yeah, I know you guys were just curious.
Yeah.
And then we're not streaming this on Channel 8, right?
No.
Okay.
You access.
Right. You guys are doing great, by the way.
Yeah.
All this got stood up pretty quick. You guys are doing great. Not a complaint, just more out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Yep.
Matt, I meant to send an email after the last meeting, but I wanted to say great work to staff on that first real big Zoom meeting. That you guys handled that well, and having public comment went fairly smooth, at least from our side. I think some of the residents had problems on their own end, but great work.
Yeah. Thanks. staff, Kevin, and it's recording video, but just in the gallery view. Sorry, you're muted, Kevin.
It's hard to get everybody in the gallery. Like my gallery view is not the same as your gallery view, so. Whatever.
Right, yeah. But that's the best we could come up with for visual.
Cool.
Kevin, you can adjust it so that you're only showing video participants rather than non-video participants, right? That way it's only focused on who's actually visible.
Yep.
Okay.
But on the last time we still had I had 9, it's Brady Bunch, right? So
yep.
If we had other.
You can pin people that you want to remain in the gallery view.
Can I remove people from the gallery view, Mark?
I think you can mute me if you want and just get rid of me.
Okay, looks like the Brady Bunch is back here, and we'll get going again. All right, we're on to item D, which is discussion of tobacco ordinance. Ken, I think you would put this on or requested this.
Yeah, so I sent a refresher email to the board earlier tonight for where this came from, and really this item reaches all the way back to September of 2019 from a email that was sent by Kendra related to changes at the state level relating to how tobacco can be regulated, and there were a menu of 3 options that were provided to us for steps we could actually formally take as a statutory municipality. So the first one was raising the minimum age of possession of tobacco to 21, which we already did. The second was requiring licensing of everyone selling tobacco and nicotine products. This has additional implications from staff time and whatnot. And then the third option available to us is imposing a tax on tobacco and nicotine products. And again, this cannot occur until we actually go through a election, because due to Tabor, it would have to go through in an election process and go to the voters. But at the time when we actually addressed this, we knew that 21 was low-hanging fruit and it was something we could handle, but we pushed off those other 2 options for discussion until a later time. So my goal of bringing this back to the board was to actually have the discussion. Personally, I'll kick it off since I'm the one who brought it forward. Option 3 of imposing a substantial tax on tobacco and nicotine and going to the voters. I don't think this is a priority for us that would necessitate going to the voters, and I don't think now is the right time to do such a thing. So I'm not in favor of moving forward with option 3. Option 2 of requiring licensing for everyone who sells tobacco and nicotine products. I am interested in hearing more about what this would entail from a staff level, because we clearly have to set up the licensing process, and we would also have to set up any type of fee structure and collecting those fees, et cetera. So I'd like to better understand what it would require from a staff perspective and what the positives and negatives are and benefits, and have a reasonable conversation. And further, again, something that was mentioned in Kendra's email is that we would have a lot more flexibility in being able to actually legislate around flavored vaporizers and that sort of thing, which frankly, I think if any of you guys have done the research and listened in on the experts, that's where the real worry and criteria and concern is. And that's what's getting kids hooked early on. Being home rule gives us the needed flexibility to actually put in regulations that I think would be worthwhile. So I'll add this to the list of the many things I think home rule would be beneficial for, but just bringing this up
Okay.
here, board thought.
Okay, Ken, thanks for bringing this up, and I'll add a little bit into this because I've been involved in a committee that the county set up several months ago, and the discussion has been exactly these three things. It's basically the county's process. It was county health department. They wanted to get together all the different municipalities in the county, mostly the smaller ones, to try to get everybody onto the same page. And so I've attended a couple of those meetings. They've, like every other standing meeting, they've kind of gone off track a little bit, just given the COVID situation. But where they were headed was all of the other small municipalities, and us included, they like the idea of licensing retailers, and they like the idea of considering a tax, but all of them kind of sounded the same concerns that we did, and that is staffing and cost to set all of that up. So the thought was, what if the county, something was done on the county level to license retailers at the county level, and also potentially tax at the county level, and it would kind of cover all of us, and then encouraging those that have not done so already to raise the age to 21, which we've done, and we got some good kudos for being kind of the first to do that. So that's where that discussion's going, and I think that will continue. It's been a productive process, good attendance from all over the county, and even had some youth members of it as well. So it's been well done by the county, and I think the effort will continue. So my opinion on this would be, let's let that play out rather than us going down any kind of path of licensing or anything on our own. Anyone
That's
else?
good context, Clint. I appreciate that. I think that makes sense, and I like that direction.
Okay. And if anyone would like to be a part of those committee meetings or discussions, I'm happy to plug anyone else into that if you'd like to participate in that. Next time I get a notice of meeting, I'll circulate it, and they are going to do some video meetings, I believe, which in some ways is actually easier to get attendance, I think. So, all right, so I'll keep everyone informed in that, and we'll just keep that discussion going. But if it's okay, we'll move on to the Boulder County ballot measure, affordable housing, transportation, property tax, sales tax. This is another one that the county's been meeting on a couple of times. I've been to a couple of the meetings. Alex Ornella's been to a couple that I was not able to go to. And the latest that I heard from Commissioner Elise Jones was that, just given the COVID situation, they were going to hold off on the polling. That was kind of the next step, was to do some polling among voters to see what the appetite was for property tax versus sales tax, but they're going to probably hold on that. And so if they hold on that, that's probably an indication that they're going to hold off on the ballot measure entirely. But so I don't know how much we want to dive into this, kind of given the unknowns there, but certainly welcome for anyone else to add anything to this discussion if you'd like to.
So is the county's plan to go forward with a ballot measure but not do the survey, or they're just not going to do it this year?
That's unknown at this time. I mean, they need to do, I think they would probably not go forward with a ballot measure without doing surveying, because there's a significant cost in doing a ballot measure, and you need to know whether it's going to have a chance of passing, and you need to know whether you need to go more property tax or sales tax, and then you just need to know whether there's voter appetite to support what you're going for anyway. And I think where we are with this coronavirus crisis and the budget crisis that a lot of municipalities in the county and the state are going to be in, I think they're going to be hard pressed to make this something that voters would put on the top of their list, but that's just my opinion. So my suggestion would be we just put this in the, let's keep monitoring it. And there's a whole lot of, this is one of the many, many things that you're kind of on a certain track at the beginning of the year, and then you just find yourself on a completely different track now. And we'll just have to see where this all plays out.
So I agree with that. The discussion that we've had previously about affordable housing, generally tended to revolve around, doing something, with Brixmor and or at the RTD site, so somewhere, walking distance of the BRT station. Just throwing it out there, but I don't know if we've had any discussions with Brixmor over the recent, couple months. I know that they were talking at some point about investing some serious money into the marketplace and, potentially doing some sort of redevelopment with residential as well. Similarly with RTD, RTD is in kind of dire straits right now with nobody riding the bus. I don't know if they would maybe be interested in selling that parcel of land, and if so, would we be interested in potentially buying it? Just spitballing right now.
Yeah. To your first point, Matt and I met with Matthew Berger in Los Angeles when we were there for that entertainment experience conference in, I believe it was January. And, they, at that point, they were still talking about doing some redevelopment options on the marketplace, and including a affordable housing component potentially at the RTD BRT site. But I would imagine those plans are now kind of shifted a little bit lower on their priority list, given what they've got going on right now at all of their centers. So that I don't think is going to get a lot of traction. As far as RTD potentially selling, I don't see them doing that. I think that just kind of goes against their, I don't know if they can even sell it, because they have this commitment to provide parking at their different sites. So I don't see them doing that. But I think that at a certain time this all will pass and get back to some sort of new normal, and there will be opportunities to do affordable housing at that site. So I do think we will get back to that. I continue to believe that's our best option for where to do some type of affordable type housing in Superior.
When we talked about this last time, I thought there was a third option, where we're not necessarily dependent on a third party that may or may not be interested. And that was kind of just control our own destiny with the 76th Street properties.
That's correct. And we've had some discussions with some of those property owners, and we continue to have discussions with them, and some have expressed some interest in that. With the recent pandemic, we have to revisit with them and see where they're at. But yeah, we have had some discussions with property owners.
Because ultimately, I like the background on Brixmor and RTD, but let's be honest, they're not. Brixmor is not going to be doing anything in this space for a while. RTD, like you said, I think even if they could do something with the space, it's unlikely that they'll be looking at it for some time. I want us to look beyond, where we're sort of subject to somebody else's whims, and let's put every option on the table for every parcel of land that might work, and I think definitely pursue it.
Agreed. I think if there is a prolonged downturn, that could be an opportunity for us to do something in that space and that space of time. And yeah, there are a couple of different space options within the town. So yeah, definitely think we don't lose track of our commitment to keep doing something. And I'm very pleased that we now have a sitting board that is behind the concept of doing something with affordable housing. And so that I would like us to use that support to move something at some point here in the future. Okay, with that, we'll move on to item F, discussion of Louisville Library and what potential changes could be made to that agreement. And Neil?
So I didn't ask for this to be on here, but one thing I will at least vent a little bit of my frustration on the Louisville Library right now, and it's not the library board itself. I think they function great. It's actually a very productive, very efficient board. From within Louisville to get onto the Louisville Library Board, they had 30, 40 people apply. They only selected 2. So it's a very sought after position on the board. My frustration is a little bit with the actual role that we even provide on the board. We supply 20% of the budget. We have 1 seat on the board, but at the same time, Louisville isn't even participating in the board any longer. They're, as we talked about liaisons before, they've kind of pulled back from all the committee and boards, and now the board has to basically just present out to Louisville Library, which to me suggests that the Louisville board, City Council actually gets to set the agenda for the library board itself rather than the members. And that's probably not a true statement, but I think there's some definite asymmetry with how we're represented relative to the way that the Louisville City Council can kind of provide oversight relative to our single seat on the board itself. No question that with the way that this IGA was structured, our contribution is tied to mill levy receipts, and Louisville's contribution is sales tax receipts. So there's again some asymmetry there. We didn't necessarily tie our contribution to a specific percentage of the total budget. So as property values have gone up, our relative contributions gone from 16 to about 20%. And as the town of Superior continues to grow, that number is definitely going to continue to grow as we add more real estate, across town. So, and the values continue to go up. So I don't know what the right time is to reinvestigate that sort of math within the IGA itself. But I think there is a wholesale question with respect to, what is our actual role of oversight on the library itself relative to what the IGA specifies and how Louisville City Council is kind of providing guidance to all of their boards.
So do you have a proposal, Neil?
No, this wasn't my idea on here. I just wanted to provide some background on some of the sort of moving pieces with respect to the library itself. But just reading or some of the comments in here, I mean, there's definitely something to be said with respect to us rolling out 1500 Colton Road, and what does that relationship look like going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'll put this like another entity where there's a lot of tax going into. It's not about the value of the tax, it's about kind of proportionality. And I think we have we have not received the value that I would have expected. With what we're thinking with 1500 Colton, I think that's gonna, I expect the partnership with Louisville to resolve that problem. And I think we will have, the 20% of the dollars should be reflective of the 20% of the value. But right now I do not think, and I know people will talk about, oh, but wait, when you look at the circulation, libraries are not about circulation anymore. So 20% circulation versus 20% of the revenue. And I don't even know that's what it is, but it's not what libraries are about anymore. Libraries are about something else. We're about to, if things go forward, I don't want to say if, when things go forward, we're adding that some library functionality right here within our community. We're going to be leveraging that 20%, that $300,000 roughly. I think it would be premature to revisit the IGA at this point, but if we're not able to come to resolution with our fantastic partner, which would be a very unlikely scenario that we do not resolve things with Louisville and don't have a partnership for a call it an annex, call it a satellite, I don't care what you call it, but some library services within the community, then we could revisit the IGA. But at this point, I think it's premature. I think it should be top of the agenda, and I'm glad it's on the retreat. I just don't want to revisit the IGA at this point.
Yeah, and Kevin, I would tend to agree with you. I think the library has struggled to, how to relate to Superior and how to service us, because we haven't had the space. But, the new director, she's been there a year and a half. She is gung-ho about leveraging 1500 Colton to, really get the people that are out here. I know they've got data. They don't track, who shows up for the, sort of early kid reading. But anecdotally, there's a lot of folks from Superior that go over there for the, for the reading sessions, which they want to start hosting here. They just struggle to find the space. So I think you're absolutely right. Where, we entered into the IGA at a time when library cards were getting cut up. So there's definitely some unnecessary desperation at the time. But I think a lot of that is well behind us. With the relationship is much stronger than it used to be. And I think, with the director today, she really sees the value of the library much greater than circulation. For her, it's about communicating with the community. She's been in on all the 1500 Colton discussions, so I'm anxious to see the space get utilized the way that we see it as well. And I would tend to agree with you. I don't know that the IGA needs to be restructured. I'm just, at a macro sort of oversight level, I don't know that we've got, the right hooks in for the relative contribution that we get. It's fantastic. The library is so super receptive to the comments and the commentary that we've made, and the sort of the availability of 1500 Colton will definitely increase the opportunity for them to demonstrate to us following through on that. The real question becomes ultimately, if we do want to change, what is the influence path even there? Because if it's not the library board itself, how does this work within the city council of Louisville, given their sort of hands-off approach to the board itself? Nothing to debate right now, something to, as you said, kind of keep it on the back burner or top of the list, or something to continue to revisit.
Okay. Anyone else have anything? All right. Let's go on then to next item, which is item G, which is street parking, possibly limiting the time duration for parking on the street. This is sort of like Airbnbs. It tends to rear its head every now and then. There is currently no mechanism to prevent a legally registered vehicle from parking on town streets for an indefinite period of time, which to some people is not a problem, but to other people, depending on the type of vehicle and where it is in their line of sight every day, it can become a problem. And other municipalities have dealt with this in different ways. I most recently had a conversation with Mayor of Centennial about their ordinance that they just put in place that limits vehicle on-street parking to no more than 14 days. And the challenge, though, is, how do you start the clock? How do you make sure that it hasn't moved within those 14 days? So there's a lot of hands-on to kind of make sure if you're going to ticket someone, you're doing it legitimately and without violating someone's rights to park a legally registered vehicle on the street. So just the purpose of this agenda item is just to kind of gauge the pulse of the board as to appetite towards exploring an ordinance for the town of Superior to limit the time frame for on-street parking. And my opinion would be yes. I think it probably is time to look at doing that, but also have I would tend to go towards more in line with what Centennial's done, a longer time frame, 14 days. Erie, I saw in the staff memo, had 24 hours, which I can't imagine how I can't imagine how that would even work. I mean, if you go out of town for the weekend or something, I mean, plenty of cars are on the street for 24 hours. And so I don't know how that would work, but I think for me, this is about dealing with those parked there for a long time, but probably should be in a vehicle storage place or someone's garage or something like that, and they just are utilizing the city streets for it. So interested in others' opinions.
Yeah, I think that generally, if you have a situation where you've got a college kid parking their car in front of their parents' house, but it's parked across the street in front of the neighbor's house, and then they're off at college, they don't need their car. I can certainly understand from the residents' perspective how they would potentially get frustrated if the car is actually in front of their house and it's a spot that they typically park in. So I agree that I think, 24 hours is a little bit too, draconian. But I think other jurisdictions that have imposed these sorts of requirements do it for two purposes. Number one, to prevent people from just, storing their cars on the street for just really long periods of time in front of other people's properties as a kind of a nuisance. And then number two, to move the cars so then the street sweepers can actually come in and actually do the job that they need to do to actually clean the streets. So I know in Denver that they have during the months of April till October, you can't park on this side of the street on Tuesdays, and then you can't park on the other side of the street on Wednesdays. And then, that's how they deal with enforcement. It's just, if you don't move your car, you're going to get a ticket because the street sweepers are coming in. The other way that I see that this could potentially work is, frankly, I think that this is going to be something that when you have a resident, and this is how it came, at least to my attention, is that there was a resident who was complaining about a vehicle parked in front of his house, kind of really close to his driveway and mailbox, that it will police itself, not by, having the sheriff's office or code enforcement trying to police it, but by having actually residents calling and saying, hey, there's this vehicle that hasn't moved. And then, yeah, they'll start the clock ticking once that complaint is registered. So I don't think that this is necessarily going to require an undue amount of time to police it. It'll just give a solution right now to a problem that's not a huge problem, but right now we just don't have a solution if the car is not abandoned. If it has tags, if it's working, we can't do anything about it. And I think it's reasonable to require people to move their car. I don't know what it is, once every week. That seems reasonable. Once every 72 hours, I don't know, 96 hours, something like that. 2 weeks seems kind of long. But I do agree, if somebody's leaving town for the weekend, they shouldn't have to worry about it in that situation. So I'd be supportive of a code change that would require you to move your car at a minimum, once a week, maybe a little less.
So I guess I'll go. I have really mixed feelings about this. I have great neighbors, and every once in a while my neighbors do something careless, like park a car in front of my driveway or in front of my house. And if it annoys me, and I actually have a fire hydrant, and if it annoys me, if it's there for too long, then I like my neighbors and I know them and they're polite, and I'll say, hey, could you do me a favor and move your car? And without exception, they've done it, and they continue to come over for barbecues. And so the optimal solution is, neighborly conversations, but I know not everybody is as lucky as I am to have nice neighbors that will do that. The least optimal solution for me is to legislate this fix, but I'm willing to do so because we've gotten a bunch of complaints about it over the years. But before when we started this, I've got really mixed feelings about it. So if we were to do something, I personally would not be ready. I don't feel like I have an informed opinion because I'm spoiled, and I would need to have a more robust process to engage the community to get their thoughts. But my preliminary thoughts, despite being mixed, and I don't like legislating this, it sounds like we need to do something. And I agree, finding some middle ground. It can't be a month, but it can't be 24 hours. So instinctually something else, but I'd like it to be more informed by data and some community outreach.
Kevin, I really like what you said about more community outreach. I think that's definitely needed. I'd like to hear more broadly what everyone in the community thinks about this rather than just the few people who have written in. That said, I would tend to lean toward a policy similar to what Mark said. I think it's not unreasonable for it to be maybe a little bit under a week. I had an issue a couple of years ago with a car parked in front of my house for weeks, where I didn't know whose it was. I went to my surrounding neighbors and it was none of their cars. And it ended up being somebody several doors down that I hadn't gone that far. But I think it can be difficult to resolve it by just finding the neighbor. So I would like to see us, put a rule around this. I think, yes, you should be able to go away for a weekend, but if you're going to go away for a week, then you could park your car in your driveway while you're gone. You could park your car in your garage, and that's what they're there for.
Yeah, I would definitely like to see us explore it. I don't know what the answer is, but as I think you all know, I live on Rock Creek Circle, and Rock Creek Circle has become pretty much the dumping ground for neighborhoods where people don't want motorhomes parked in front of their houses or other commercial vehicles. And while I certainly understand that other people don't want them parked in front of their houses, I don't think the people who live in the houses that face Rock Creek Circle particularly want a big old commercial truck parked and left and not moved for a week or 10 days at a time. We have had some issues with pretty motorhomes coming in there, and we never did find out whether people were living in them or just there temporarily. There's been a couple of cases where the police department has had them removed because of invalid tags and stuff, but that isn't always the case. So I think there's different situations in different parts of town, and so it does require some sensitivity to what the situation is. But I would like to see us put some sort of, I don't want them to be draconian, but I think there are some vehicles in town that should be stored in a vehicle storage lot. You can't do it in Broomfield. You got to put your vehicle in a vehicle storage lot. So I'd like to see us at least explore it more robustly than we have to date.
So I think the only comments that I'll add to this is maybe this was a larger issue prior to myself joining the board. I've heard reference to multiple complaints about this. I've only seen a single email that came through recently from a resident identifying this as a problem. So I don't see it as a larger issue. I think some of you all do. Where I'd like to avoid is putting the town in the middle of spats between neighbors. I do agree with Kevin that if we can get people to work this issue out amicably, that's better. So I'd rather us lean towards the side of a longer time period that a vehicle can stay there. That way there is more time for neighbors to figure out a solution, identify whose car it is, not put us as an enforcement arm in the middle of this issue. So I would preferably lean closer to maybe a 3-week time horizon rather than a 1 week or a 2 week. That way there's enough time for it to be resolved amicably among neighbors. But I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to this type of change to our ordinance.
Yeah, but I think that, sorry.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I think what Laura was saying is absolutely correct, though. I mean, 95% of these situations will resolve themselves because you know your neighbors and you're going to be able to walk across the street and say, hey, would you mind moving your car? But for that 5% of situations where you have no idea who the owner of the vehicle is and you really can't figure it out, that's when it becomes a problem that I think requires some solution. So whatever the time frame is, that's where we would come. And that's, we did the same thing with the RVs and with the trailers. There was people that were parking trailers on Rock Creek Circle, and we changed the code to address that a couple of years ago, I think before the three of you were on the board. So, there are these issues that are just one of these things that you look at the code and we just don't have a solution right now. And, most jurisdictions have some reasonable requirement that you need to move your vehicle. And you just can't park it there in perpetuity.
Yeah, that was the only thing I was going to add is that, I think it would be helpful to have something on the code or in the code specifically, for that, car that probably was abandoned or someone forgot. We had a car that got left here a little while ago, because somebody drunk parked it there and they forgot where he parked it. It took, a week before it got removed. Yeah, so those things happened because, there wasn't anything that anyone could do about getting it removed. But I want to just ask a quick question. I mean, what is our policy for parking in town parking lots? And the reason I ask is before we close it, I'm an early user of the dog park, and I've noticed a fair number of cars using the Autry parking lot that are probably spillover from one of the neighboring complexes. Like, what do we have overnight rules or extended parking restrictions for our town parking lots?
Yeah, they're public parking lots. I mean, we typically aren't overly concerned if somebody parks a car there overnight. We're not going to tow somebody. But if there's a car that's parked there for more than let's say somebody using it rather than parking at the RTD lot, then we'll either we'll try to get a hold of the owner and ask them to remove it, and if we can't, then we've had them towed in the past.
Okay.
Okay, so it sounds like the general direction of the board is to have staff proceed with exploration of some type of ordinance, which I agree with. This is really about having a tool when a tool is needed. In most cases, it's not going to be needed, but it's when people are either not being reasonable or not being able to be located to move a vehicle along. So I think and that's really frustrating to residents when they learn that you don't have a tool to deal with something, and that's kind of what we're here to do, is create solutions when there are none. So,
and Matt, it's probably not worth spending $30,000 on a survey. And frankly, I think the survey instruments we use around SurveyMonkey and stuff are useless. We're not informed by data. I don't know, they're just bad. But I think if you could put it in the Sentinel or some, on the website or something that says, hey, we are considering this. Do you have a point of view? And yes, we're going to get selection bias because you'll get people that have a point of view one way or another. But I think just starting to communicate to the public that we are thinking about something like this, do you have a point of view, would be great. And I think all of us have a presence, and we should do the same thing. Ask if people have a point of view around it. So,
yeah, good.
You can do that.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Next up is item H, which is environmental sustainability goals. And Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, so we spoke about this at a previous retreat. I wanted to just kind of bring this back onto the attention of the board and actually put on some dates in here to actually get some goals thrown out there. So the agenda here says, get our town, buildings and properties powered 100% by renewables by the end of 2022. Meet all of Superior's municipal electric needs with 100% carbon-free sources by 2025. And then also consider a community solar array. Lafayette has a community solar array. I believe Louisville has already implemented a policy of having all of their town buildings, properties powered by renewables. I think this year it was their policy. If they haven't already achieved it, I think that they're going to achieve it this year. And then meeting Superior's municipal electric needs. So that could be partially met with a solar array by participating in Xcel's programs where you can buy from carbon neutral sources. I know that by 2030, I believe that's Xcel's revised guidelines to be carbon free. And I just think in Boulder County, I think we could probably meet that goal ahead of time. So I just wanted to raise the issue again to see what the appetite is for the board to actually adopt some aggressive but achievable ambitious goals.
Okay, thanks, Mark. In concept, I agree with those goals. I would just need more information about costs and feasibility for making all of that happen. But I think we could figure all of that out. But directionally, I think those are good goals, provided that it could be done in a reasonable fashion. Ken?
So I apologize. I did not have an opportunity to read through the 2020 energy baseline audit that was provided to us for this meeting. So maybe some of my questions are answered in here, but in concept, like Clint, I don't have any objections to this. What I would want to hear is from town staff is a path forward. Are these achievable? What is the cost to put these into place? And both from a just one time actually infrastructure, standing these up and doing the transition, and also from a staff time, and better understand what the opportunity costs are if we go forward with this type of project. What would we have to give up because we don't have the staff time or the budget to do so? So just better understanding where this project would fall in line with most of our other CIP projects, because even though it's a policy decision, it has infrastructure requirements. It will basically go down to the CIP, I'd imagine. So that's what I'd be looking for from town staff. I am comfortable giving town staff the direction to pull that information together, because I do think this is a laudable and worthwhile goals, and I do believe we should be moving in this direction. So I'm comfortable giving that direction, but not comfortable saying, yes, I sign up for these dates and specific goals at this moment.
And my other suggestion was also that, you know, town staff work hand in hand with ACES on this, because this is absolutely central to their mission, and I think that they would have a lot of fun with it. You know, the dates weren't necessarily, you know, set in stone there for purpose of, you know, we need to do this by 2022. It was more an idea of, if you don't put in the dates, you're never going to execute on anything in a timely manner. So let's just set some dates and agree on it. But, you know, obviously we want it to be, you know, realistic and achievable. So we don't want to just set a date that nobody's going to meet, but we also don't want to set a date that's too far out into the future that it doesn't become a priority. So whatever the date is, that's really immaterial. But I think it is important for us to have a date and agree on that date, and then to work towards meeting the goal by that date.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that. I mean, I like that perspective, Mark, because one of the challenges is we're at 18% renewable right now. You know, where are Lafayette and Louisville on that, you know, that adoption curve? You know, were they ahead of us, behind us? And then what does it look like, you know, as ACES and staff kind of works together on this? What does it look like economically? Because speaking for myself, trying to go carbon neutral is not easy. It's expensive, you know, between the solar panels, the high efficiency furnace, composting, the rain barrels and stuff like this, the smart thermostat, the smart water meter. It's difficult. And as you try to chase that last 5 to 10%, it gets actually progressively more difficult to do. So we just need to be cautious that, you know, we're not chasing after an unobtainable goal, because, you know, the town's energy footprint is going to continue to evolve. And there's costs associated with renewable, you know, especially right now with oil being negative. Renewable is expensive at the onset. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we're close as we can get at my house. I want to go down this path, but there's an economic trade-off, you know, in terms of what Ken alluded to. You know, if we're going to have a higher cost for energy over the long term, you know, what are we going to have to potentially take away? It's a good discussion to have. Don't get me wrong. You know, we're living it. You know, triple pane windows, you know, e-glass, so on and so forth. You know, it's not easy to get there, but it's the right direction.
I agree that this is the right direction for us to go, and I'd like to see us do that. I'm also a big fan of having SMART goals, you know, specific, measurable, actionable, all the rest of it. I'm a little nervous about these numbers just because I don't know how attainable they are. So I think I'll echo everyone else. I would like to see us develop a policy like this, whether it's these exact numbers or not. I realize that's not the purpose of tonight's discussion, but I think this is great.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add outside of, you know, it's going to be a goal, right? So I just want to assess the, you know, as we come, I think Neil had a great point. As we get closer to the goal, it's going to be harder to achieve. You know, that last 10, 20% is always the hardest, right? And so just because we set a goal, even if we have timelines, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean that we're writing that blank check. So I will always want to balance, the goal that we set, and I fully supported the goal, and it's noble against the other priorities of the community. And, we could be, we are entering uncharted times. Like, we're going to need to talk about capital improvement projects and a number of other things. And this is a goal, and it's important, and it is a priority. But the priority is, for me, public safety, continuity of business, things like that. And if we need to sacrifice and push off on some of those goals around sustainability from an environmental perspective, I'm personally uncomfortable pushing it off. So I'll set the goals and do everything we can do to meet them, but they're going to be just that, and we need to recognize that things change.
Yeah, but I mean, part of this discussion is, if we take ourselves from 18% to 75%, right? And then we've then made a cost benefit analysis as to what the remaining 25% is going to cost. That to me is still a tremendous win. And, we're making progress on an important issue. So, obviously we want to be, prudent in terms of, what the costs are going to be, what just the investment in time and resources to get something like this pushed forward. But if we don't push it forward, we're just going to continue the status quo. And I think that we could do better than we're currently doing. And I think our neighboring jurisdictions are, doing a better job on this issue. And I think that, we should just try to do better. I mean, we've got a committee specifically about sustainability. And this to me seems like it would be just a perfect add-on to their working plan for the year. And, this would be something that they would be really proud of to help deliver for the town.
Yeah, and actually, Mark, I'll echo that. I mean, I guess I'll be honest. The renewable number here is much lower than I would have thought. With the number of arrays that we have and how much dialogue we've had about this, I thought our share of renewables was much higher. So, we absolutely need to try to find a way to optimize that a little bit better.
Okay, anyone else? All right, thanks, Mark, for that item. We're on to item J, which is tax relief for 2020. What can we do for small business, homeowners, board interests, Boulder County taking any steps for homeowner relief? Is there
Yeah, so that was mine.
to take the lead on this?
Yeah, the next
Okay.
few are all mine. And as before, I kind of probably had a stream of consciousness epiphany while I sent this over to Matt. And Matt, I got to admit, you have to have the largest water cup I think I've ever seen. Yeah, I mean, part of this discussion was, as we sort of looked at what, we successfully pulled off for the small businesses, and recognizing that a lot of folks in town, may not be able to work at home, maybe they've lost their jobs. What degrees of freedom do we have with respect to mill levies or sales taxes? And I mean, I really appreciate the note that's in the memo. I mean, there's not a lot we can do. 1 mill reduction, has a sizable impact to the town budget, and it's sort of de minimis at the homeowner level, because the mill levy, the town derives from home taxes is, for this town is not very big relative to the total. And I probably should have looked at that before I suggested putting this on here. But, I think what I haven't heard is anything happening at the county level, because I know that a lot of people, they're getting a new escrow statement that's, based on home appreciation 2019 and 2020. And it's thrown a lot of, an extra $100, $150 a month that they don't have right now. So I don't know what steps that the county is going to take in terms of trying to figure that out. But it was more a thought exercise around, given what we've been able to do for small businesses, is there anything in our tool belt that's out there for the rest of the community? Or is it even needed?
Okay, thanks, Neil. Thoughts? Others? My view is to maybe continue monitoring things. I think we've done some great work with the grant program for the small businesses, restaurants, and that I think was the most immediate need. I think it's, we could explore something on an individual level as well, but I think we're also going to be facing some budget challenges, I think, at the town level. I mean, we've not fully seen the impacts to town. I mean, I think we're in probably a better shape than a lot. We've got a couple of retailers that have been very busy with people continuing to shop during this downturn, but we've had a lot that have been turned off, and I don't know that we've really seen what impact that's going to be. So I guess before I would want to commit a whole lot more money out the door to before we realize what we might need kind of in-house. I mean, a lot of towns are laying people off, and I don't think we've done that, and it's fortunate that we hope we don't have to go there, but so that's my thoughts. Ken?
Yeah. Neil, I appreciate you putting this on here. I've had a lot of similar thoughts. Where I've landed, and basically where you just landed as well, was that it will have to be a much more targeted program. I think where I landed in my own mind with not necessarily doing anything at this moment is that our society is built around having our social safety nets, and while there's arguments about how effective they are and whatnot, there is unemployment insurance that's out there. There's ways, if you lose your job, there's something there for you, but this completely unexpected turning off the ability of small businesses to even operate due to the stay-at-home orders and whatnot. But that's where I landed with the difference of we need to do something for our small businesses versus we need to get out there and do something at a individual household level. I would agree. Let's definitely keep our eyes on this. And I think it's something that if we get to the point that there's a need and there's a way we can craft some type of program, and whether that's providing additional resources to a food share, whether it's Meals on Wheels, whatever it is that ultimately gets to the needs of the community, I am more than supportive of us taking a leading role in it. But I don't know what that is right now and what we would do. But it's something to keep an eye on.
Hey, Matt, remind me, the SMD2 and SMD3 mill levies that were sunsetting after the 20 years, did those already sunset, or is that happening this year?
They sunsetted at the end of 2018, so homeowners saw that reduction in property tax in 2019.
Okay.
And that was 5 mills.
Right. And then the discussion that we've had before about kind of reducing the mills each year, I guess there was a policy. We've got authorization to go, I forget to what it is, 13 or something. Yeah,
the voter authorization is just somewhere above 12 mills. I think it's 12 and a half, close to 12 and a half mills. And we do a annual temporary property tax reduction or credit of 4 mills every year.
And we're continuing that this year, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And how long have we been doing that?
Yeah, I would say it's probably close to 15, 20 years now.
And I think this is a different conversation than what we have agenda, but I think that is an important policy for us to discuss. We always have a lot that we leave on the cutting room floor from the CIP budget, and there is and of course we all want to make sure that we're being prudent with taxpayer dollars and that we're not over collecting. I will be the first to push for that. However, there's also the flip argument that there is an expectation that we are providing all the additional services and meeting the essential needs of our town. And really, are we actually doing a benefit to our residents by not collecting the full amount that we are authorized to do so? Because that pushes off road projects, it pushes off infrastructure improvement, it pushes off all types of projects that are arguably quite beneficial to our residents. So maybe that's something I should have thought about and had added as a formal agenda item to this retreat, but it's a conversation that I would like us to have before we get into approving a budget for the next fiscal year. That way we're all on the same page. I think we've all been kind of moving in this direction because it's just been our policy, but it's a policy I think we need to actually formally discuss again.
Well, it's an interesting problem to have. And, you know, frankly, from my perspective, Ken, you know, we've got an other on the agenda. I mean, we've got other things to go through, so we don't necessarily need to talk about it now, but I think we can and we could. But, you know, most local governments or state governments, you know, here in Colorado, we've got the requirement to go to the voters before you raise taxes. We've got the unique positioning where we could, you know, raise a significant amount that's already been authorized. We're just electing not to. And obviously it would come as a surprise to our residents because they say, why do my property taxes go up without a vote? But, you know, the question is, what's the lasting impact of having a policy of 15 to 20 years of, you know, consecutive mill levy reductions? Because I do agree with you, because that certainly does hamper our ability to make other investments in the CIP, you know, program. And, you know, it's easy politically to cut taxes and to not raise taxes. It's hard to make the decision to actually ask residents to pay more. But we also have a unique, and I think, you know, a bunch of residents here in Superior who are actually willing to invest in their town, because I think they trust us and they feel that we're being responsible stewards of their resources. So it is worth having the discussion as to whether that's the right policy going forward. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, I touched on this briefly during the budget period, because it's a source of revenue that we could tap into. There was also I mean, there's always the discussion of, you know, should we take it to a vote? Should we take that to a vote, even though we don't have to? Should we take it to a vote because it is a raise, but we don't have to? So I do think it's worth having that discussion perhaps at the next retreat, because I think directionally we do need to give our finance staff some sort of direction of, is this a tool we want to deploy during our next budget cycle? Because I think the next budget cycle is going to be, it could have some challenges, and we either put projects off longer or we find some revenue and keep things on track.
My preference would be not to have the full conversation about this at this retreat, but to have it at the next retreat, mostly just because we also don't know from a resident perspective how bad things are going to be and whether we want to impose that on the residents. But Matt, how far down the road can we get before staff really needs these types of answers to appropriately pull together material for the budgeting session? What type of hardship does it add to you if we don't have that conversation until our next retreat?
We start to prep for the budget, you know, for 2021. We'll start in May, late May, early June. So if you have a discussion in July, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Okay. All right, our next item is item K, board meeting efficiency options, extra meeting per quarter, agenda setting meeting, etc. And there was a staff note just saying, before we add meetings, let's maybe look at not cutting or having meetings when we've maybe cut them, such as the summer break or spring break or that sort of thing. My personal view is I think our current meeting schedule works well. It's worked well for the last couple of years. I think as long as we can kind of regulate time in individual meetings, I don't necessarily think we need more meetings or less meetings. I think we're adapting to the meeting end time. I know that's maybe a point of discussion here as well. Actually, that's not really part of this agenda item, but that might be on some people's minds. So Neil, did you have this agenda? Did you ask?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I'm the author
go
of these
ahead.
last few. I mean, part of it is I know we had the board meeting discussion about meeting end time, which, to be honest, I'm a huge proponent of the end time because it does sort of allow for, you know, go home and sleep a regular night. But the main thing here is if we are struggling to get everything to fit into the number of meetings that we have, you know, how do we make ourselves more efficient? Where can we add more meetings? And I think the staff note here is sufficient, is that, you know, we do have at our discretion additional meeting capacity already. You know, if we need an extra 15 hours, or 5, maybe 7 hours a quarter, it's there and it's available to us. And I'd like us to at least, you know, use that, you know, rather than, you know, going to 3 times a month or whatever. So really the question was here is around, you know, what can we do to keep the meetings efficient and, you know, as necessary, add meetings. And I think what, you know, what staff has added in here is that we do have, you know, discretion already in there. If you take away the 4 meetings that we cancel per year, we may actually have the bandwidth to manage ourselves.
So I think we talked about this briefly when we were talking about the meeting end policy. But one of the things I feel strongly about is I think we can get more efficient in the meetings that we do have. I think a lot of it, the part we talked about before, comes around our board norms. We don't need to feel like we all need to chime in on every topic just to have our say. I mean, yes, it's great to set, like, I think we've been doing a good job with this actually in our virtual meetings, better than we have been in person, where we just say, like, yes, Neil, I agree with you. And then I shut up and I don't say anything else. And I think that helps a lot. I think also when it comes to the longer agenda items, for example, like a development application, I think it works best when we don't go down the line and say, okay, Neil, tell us everything you have to say. Now Ken, tell us every concern. But we try to segment it where possible and say, all right, let's all talk about what we think about the colors, and then let's talk about the streets, and then let's talk about the parking or whatever. I think if we can kind of take that agenda approach, well, agenda is the wrong word because I'm not necessarily suggesting we formally publish it into our agenda in that manner. But if we can take that topic-based approach, I think we'll get through things a lot faster than right now everyone you know, giving their speech.
Yeah, agreed. Okay.
I'm not in favor of scheduling any additional meetings, and I'm not in favor of an agenda setting meeting. I think if we need more meetings, we shouldn't cancel the meetings that we currently cancel. If people can't make them because they're going on vacation, then, you know, if everybody's on vacation, we won't have a quorum. But you know, generally speaking, it's okay if somebody misses a meeting, and that's just what happens. So if we need to get more meetings, we should just schedule them on the 2nd and 4th Mondays, just like we do throughout the year. And I'm not in favor of any. I don't necessarily know how it would work in terms of trying to make it more efficient in terms of, you know, what the discussion is going to look like. I know that some jurisdictions like Broomfield, you have 5 minutes to talk, and that's it. And so you talk for 5 minutes, and I think that that's not a workable way to go about discussing the issues. And, you know, I was kind of aghast when I watched them go through a complex land use application as quickly as they went through it. And, you know, what we do when taking multiple meetings, you know, like we fly spec those applications, and we still miss things, but I mean, we're as diligent as we possibly can be. So I'm not in favor of necessarily any, you know, rules or procedures in terms of talking about how the discussions should be going. I think that they just need to evolve naturally and organically, and that's appropriate.
Okay, let's go Sandy, Kevin, and Ken. That's kind of the order I saw the mics turned on. So no, Sandy, your mic's off.
Well, I guess I'm one of the people who, feels very strongly about the 11 o'clock stop time. And it seemed like this spring in particular, or around every time we were canceling meetings, then we were saying, okay, well, we're not going to have a meeting for this, we're going to cut out our regular schedule. And then we end up calling a bunch of special meetings, which is not fair, particularly to those of us who do plan our lives around our schedule. So, I feel very strongly that if we're going to stop, if we're going to cancel meetings and then we decide we have to put it back on the agenda, then we go exactly back to the date where the meeting should have been, which, for example, you don't have a meeting on the 3rd week, you go ahead and have it on the 4th week. And it's not fair, particularly to our colleagues who travel and they plan their schedules weeks in advance. I agree completely with Laura that we can be more efficient in the way we're running the meetings. And I do commend Clint, because I do believe he has stopped going down the line and saying, okay, Sandy, what do you think? What do you think, Neil? He's doing more what I see happens in Louisville, which is, does anyone want to make a comment? And then people make a comment, but people don't have to make a comment. Sometimes everybody's already said what you want to say. So, and I don't need to chime in. So I would like to ask that we all be very conscious of the conversations we have in meetings. We remain respectful of, 5 hours for a meeting is a long time, and we're simply not efficient after we've been sitting for 5.5, 6 hours, and many of us have already worked a full work day. And so let's just do our best to try and be more thoughtful in our conversations during the meetings. And and I don't know how we do it better on FDPs, other than I would say that I believe we spend an inordinate amount of time on some topics, and then we completely ignore other topics that are equally as important because we simply get worn out.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. Kevin?
In the spirit of efficiency, talking about meetings, two additional, or two things. One, point of view around something that somebody said, and second, something that we haven't yet talked about. Point of view on something that somebody said, Laura, the suggestion around a best practice to keep on topic agenda. If we're talking about a development application, if we're talking about paint color, let's talk about paint color. If we're talking about setbacks, talk about setbacks. Variances, talk about variances. I think that's a good best practice, but it's not. I don't want to create a policy around that, because if we if we neglected to talk about something, I'm going to loop back, and I don't want to feel guilty about looping back because of it. But in general, I think we're trying to, directionally, we're not. I've seen a shift in this board versus previous boards, where previous boards were, all right, here's my list of 30 questions, and it was the next person with your list of 15 questions. This time it is a little bit more conversational. I think a lot of that was based on your good suggestion around, let's interrupt each other and have that healthy dialogue. And I think that's great, because that's what I think developers want, not to be taking notes on around the 30 questions and the next 30 questions. So I want to be careful, best practice versus policy. I'm fine with the meeting end times at 11 o'clock. I think, in general, sadly, if you schedule something to end at 11 o'clock, it's going to come as close to 11 o'clock as possible. It's just somehow it's human nature that you tend to, you fill the void, despite our best efforts to wrap things up quickly. But 11 o'clock seems to make sense, and I wouldn't want to revisit that. I would suggest that I don't like the fact that the announcements have been moved to the end of the meeting. I found that as valuable. I think the most valuable thing for me at a board meeting is public comment. The second most valuable thing for me personally at a board meeting is the comment from my colleagues. And when that happens towards the end of the meeting, sometimes you skip it, or sometimes it goes fast. And I'd like to see that return to the beginning of the meeting personally, because I think we're selling ourselves short. And consistent with the comment before, there's a lot of feedback that comes from other community meetings or things you've heard in the community, or sometimes just announcements that you may have heard about something or something that's personal or important to you. And I think we're selling ourselves short by pushing that to the end instead of in the beginning. Developers can wait. They can get in line. The most important thing for me is to hear from you guys and to hear from the community. And over the last few weeks, that voice has been muted a bit. So my thoughts.
So,
Ken.
since Kevin, you brought that up, I obviously agree with that. I brought that up and tried to formally amend one of our agendas during our meeting to move that forward. I think not only is it beneficial for us to hear all of that, but it's also beneficial for the community to hear those reports. And we all know that we have probably 2, 3, 4 times the amount of community members in our boardroom at the beginning of a meeting than we do at the very end of the meeting. So I absolutely would support bringing that forward. And if we can make that decision tonight, I would support that 100%. I also, I think we're doing a much better job being more efficient and effective in our meetings. I think earlier in our first year of being elected, or at least Neil and Laura and I, we had more meetings that went later and continued to push the envelope. I mean, we had a meeting a month or two ago where we ended it, I think it was like 9 o'clock or 9:30, and we've had a few of those. I am not necessarily convinced that we do need more meeting times. In my experience, the times where we have gotten close and bumped up to that 11 o'clock hour and forced ourselves to end a meeting, it isn't because we have another several agenda items. It's because we have a single agenda item we haven't yet finished and we're trying to just get it done. That doesn't necessarily mean we needed a whole nother meeting to get that done. It might mean we needed another 15 or 30 minutes. Who knows? So I don't see a need for additional meetings at this point. But if Matt is having a hard time getting all of the items on agendas that we need to discuss, Matt, I would hope that you would bring that forward to us and tell us that, hey, we have 25 meetings worth of agenda items that we need to get done, and because of our breaks there's only 24 or 23 meetings on the calendar. Then great, let's have that conversation and figure out how we get those done, and let's make sure that we are getting all the business done that needs to happen. But since we haven't heard that from Matt, I don't think we need additional meetings, and I wouldn't support that right now.
I just want to say for clarification, because I agree with Ken. I don't think we need additional meetings. So, originally I said, if we need the meetings, they should, we should just stop canceling so many of them. But I agree with Ken. Like, I don't think that there necessarily is a need for additional meetings, but if there is, then that would be one way to slice it. But since people touched on the meeting end time policy, I know that that's going to be an agenda item for, I think, our board meeting next week. Obviously, I don't like the kind of ability for one member of the board to stop us from having a discussion. I think that that's just, it's not flexible enough. So, generally speaking, I'm fine with us having an 11 p.m. stop time in general, but I think that we need to have the flexibility to continue to finish the work, because at the end of the day, I think we have certain items that we could get done with 10 to 15 minutes of additional meeting time that unfortunately then get pushed into future meetings. But we'll have this discussion obviously next week.
One other thing from an efficiency standpoint that we didn't yet talk about. I know that Matt and staff already do a good job communicating to applicants and anyone else on our agenda that they shouldn't be rehashing what's in the packet. They should be presenting us new information. I feel very strongly that I think we're still getting a lot of that. I do my homework before the meetings. I read through the packet. I look at the presentation, I read the notes, all of that. I mean, I consider it to just be quite a lot of time that we spend hearing a presentation rather than actually having time for our board to discuss. To all the points around how we're frequently 15 minutes short, I mean, some of those presentations go on for 20 minutes and there's nothing new in there. It's information that is already in the packet and written down. So I don't want to direct Matt any further without checking with everyone else on the board, but I would like to suggest that we issue a more firm direction to people that they shouldn't be repeating anything that is already written down, and that essentially that the more time they take in presentation, the less time we have for questions and discussion, and the higher likelihood it is that we don't finish at that meeting.
I guess, Laura, the only flip side to that is a big benefit of the presentation, though, is for the public watching that may not have read the packet to the detail that we have. And so it's really for people that knew this agenda item was coming to the meeting that night. They knew to show up or to tune in, but they don't know much more than XYZ is developing and they want to learn more about it. So if we just go right into discussion without any kind of high level presentation, I think it could it could kind of shortchange the public's understanding of what we're talking about or what they should be thinking about. Having said that, I do agree with you. There's some presentations I've sat through that were definitely long and repetitive and could be tightened up a bit. So I think it's a little bit of both. Needs some high level intro, but also need to be timely about it.
I think with the quasi-judicial applications, though, we need to be careful. The applicant needs to make his or her or its case, and they need to be able to make it however they choose to make it. And if they choose to focus on some issues that aren't particularly persuasive to us, that's the consequence of the way that they choose to argue their application. But if we arbitrarily say, well, you can't talk about anything that's in the packet and only talk about, some additional things. Number one, I don't think that that's constitutional. Number two, it would just, I think, subject us to, challenges in terms of, what our decisions were actually based on. And so I'd be reluctant to adopt anything that hamstrings anybody's ability to present in the manner they want to present at a public hearing.
Yeah, and similar, and I just want to agree with not only what Clint said around the values for the public, but it actually frustrates me when I hear something presented from an applicant in particular that is not in my packet. Because like you, I spend a lot of time preparing. And if I'm getting news on something, it reminds me, we had an applicant who told me that orientation to the street did not mean street facing. The visual aids, I want the talk track over the visual aids, and I would not want to send a signal to somebody saying, okay, the visual aid is in the packet and present new stuff. Exact opposite for me. I want as much information as possible in the packet. I don't want a single additional slide presented to me that I have not had an opportunity to review. And I want the talk track over what has been presented in the documents. That's my personal preference.
I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think everything should be in the packet because I want to read it in advance and be able to prepare. I just think we spend so much time in the meeting, and not just on public hearings, but on many topics where it's stuff that we all read in advance and it was all in the packet. And I think Clint, to your point around educating the public, I just think there are better ways to do that than having all of us sit there and then have the meeting run long. I mean, I think, for example, staff does a great job with the memos that precede each item in the packet. I'm wondering if, we never get, well, I'm not gonna say never. We rarely get that many people showing up to a meeting. I'm wondering if we could even just say, hey, as you come in, here's paper copies of the memo that you can read if you don't know what's going on. But let's not take the time of 10 people in the room when you count staff and attorneys and all that to recap for those who didn't prepare.
Okay. Anyone have anything else?
I'll just echo a thought thread from 5 minutes ago about bringing the updates back to the beginning. I'm fully on board with that. I think, as Kevin and Ken both alluded to, I mean, I think there's a tremendous amount of value that we all get from hearing that. And even if it's not specifically for the public, if I'm hearing an update at 10:45 versus at 6:15, it hits my brain very differently. So I think there's a lot of value to bringing it back to the beginning.
Okay. I'm on board with that as well. I'm fine with that. So it sounds like that's where most, if not everyone, is with announcements. So if Matt, if you want to make that change to the next meeting agenda, put the announcements back at the beginning, we'll just put that issue to rest. All right, let's move on to item L, economic incentives. Looking ahead, do we need to start getting serious about offering business incentives?
So it's another Neil Shah special. So the key thing here is, I think this is a little premature to discuss. No one knows where the economic catastrophe that we're facing ends, or when we start picking up the pieces and start putting the country back together again. So I do want us to be ready to the same way we offered a grant program to our businesses. I do want to keep it on the table that we look at ways of bringing new businesses in here. And obviously, there's various roles that Brixmor plays, or RC Capital and all these other spaces. But I think the economic engine that is this town needs our support in any way that we can do it. And as we go forward, I think every community is going to be competing against every other community, no different than before, but there's probably a greater level of desperation going forward. And I want us to just be cognizant of that. I don't think this is a 2020 issue. I think it's a 2021, 2022 issue and beyond. So that's kind of why I want us, again, what's on the agenda for next week is the finance committee, think about the financials, because I think this is part and parcel with that. But my thought was, I'm fully in support of economic incentives. I think they play a tremendous value. They can be, dialed up in many different forms. TIF is one of them, but there's others that are out there that other communities near us are using.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Anyone have anything else? All right, I agree with you, Neil. Kevin?
I mean, I think Neil knows this from my perspective. I'm going to want to be very selective about this. I'm not a big fan of. I'd have to be shown the business case. So we disagreed as a board. I value everybody's opinion, but on hotels, for example, a full service hotel that was in our community, I'd be interested in some type of economic incentive. An extended stay hotel that brings no value beyond tax dollars to our community, personally, I'm not supportive. And so I think it's an important conversation. I respect everybody's opinion, but if some of us are on this end of the spectrum, being camera, I'm closer to this end, where I'm less inclined and consider it a form of corporate welfare.
Okay, thanks. Anyone have anything else?
I think it's something we need to take on a case by case basis, but I fall more in line with probably the general direction of where Neil is coming from, mostly because even though I agree, I don't like the fact that this is even on the table, but the reality in looking at our neighboring municipalities is that you almost have to pay to play to get businesses to come to you sometimes. And yes, you're going to have your smaller mom and pop shops that fill your smaller storefronts and whatnot. But I mean, we see Lafayette giving large incentives to take businesses such as Kohl's from Louisville, and yes, it's completely different circumstances. They've got different economics, they've got different demographics, and it's all different. But to actually get the interest of some of these companies that I think are what we are interested in, it's a conversation that we have to have. So it's something that I want us to have the conversation. If it doesn't make sense in a particular situation, it doesn't, but I want to make sure that we at least have that conversation when we move forward.
Yeah, I think there shouldn't be any absolutes here. It should be something that, it's a tool in our toolkit that we can deploy when it's appropriate. It may never be appropriate, because we're a smaller town and we have open space to our west, and we don't necessarily have the density that some retailer is looking to have within a certain geographic area. So we may be out of the running for certain retailers that are looking at a place like Broomfield or Lafayette or Erie or something like that. But at the same time, like we shouldn't. I don't think we need to necessarily have like a rule that says it's definitely off the table, because if it's something that could help us achieve something that we otherwise wouldn't, and it makes sense, and it's not going to put us into a weak financial position, I'd be open to considering it. Generally speaking, I don't think that we're going to see these types of situations often, but at the right time and right place, it may be something that's worth considering.
Okay. All right, let's go on to item M, town modification of town codes with respect to off-leash dogs.
So I'd actually mention, or I'd wanted to pull this off. We got the communication from Officer Spencer Erie, and I think that is what I wanted to hear. The fact is that they're not in favor of this, of changing it, and I think not having it in the code gives them discretion when it goes to court. And I think that's the right direction. Unless anybody disagrees, I think Boulder County Sheriff has a fantastic perspective on this, and I think that's the right approach.
Yeah, I would agree. Others? Okay.
I don't think there's a need to make a change.
Okay. Thanks. All right. I've got 3 items in my personal other category. I'll just read them off, and then I'll take others, and then we can go through these. So during the meeting, we got a notification from BVSD that school home learning is continuing through the end of the year. And so that may put to rest the answer of the question of, can we start 88th Street now or in late May? So I think I would say now is probably the, so anyway, that's one item, BVSD school home learning through the end of the year. That's item number 1. I think that we should perhaps touch on the topic of, should we continue with online meetings after next week, after stay-at-home order is lifted. We've got some land use hearings coming up. I think that could be particularly challenging, or a little more challenging for resident participation, but at the same time, residents may not want to come to town hall either. So we've got the question of, do we continue with this platform, not only for us, but for Planning Commission? I think committees doing regular committee meetings, I think this format could work fairly well for them. So I think maybe the answer is a hybrid, but just interested in board member thoughts on that. And then Matt, if you could provide us a little update on prairie dog removal. We got a little some questions on that via social media today about prairie dogs along 88th Street, and you provided us some answers, but just maybe a global update there. And anyone else have any other topics? And then we just start going through those.
I want to spend a few minutes talking about alternative events. I think people are itching to, I think we'll start seeing some polite acts of social disobedience with the continued, whatever, we're changing it from stay at home to, what was the phrase the governor used?
Safer at home.
Safer at home. So I think what safe social distancing things can we have, and I have an idea about that I want to walk on. And ultimately, I'm going to ask Matt to noodle over it. So, and if others think it's a terrible idea, then Matt's noodling can be discontinued.
Okay, any other topics to add to our other category? Okay, then I guess we'll just kind of go back through the list as I stated them. So BVSD not going to go back into session for regular school for the rest of the school year. And my read on that would be that we just proceed immediately or as soon as they're available to do the shutdown and just get that road construction going. And probably the sooner the better, because I think there will be less people moving around as we come out of the stay at home, and as time goes by, there'll be more people moving around. So I think there's going to be less impacts on the sooner end of this project.
So I'm going to have to be very careful here. And Dan, I'm going to want you to pay attention. We have $1 million gap in our budget. I want to be very careful about the direction that we're giving to Matt, because Matt has to be doing good negotiation to make sure that we do not have a $1 million or $1.2 million gap in our budget. And if we determine at this point that we should full steam ahead and we have a bad actor, third party, not good partner to us, we could end up with $1 million gap. So we got to be really careful about the direction we're giving to Matt right now. And I think I walked that fine line appropriately, Dan.
I think you're good. That was well stated.
So, from my perspective, I think the only change in guidance, and I don't even know if it's change in guidance, I think Matt was probably already operating under these assumptions based off our last meeting, is that now that Boulder Valley has officially canceled in-person school for the rest of the year, is that let's move whatever additional plans forward that we can, assuming whatever cost. I mean, we already approved what the ceiling price is for the work for the first change order. So if there's additional change orders are required, those will certainly come back to us. But assuming the work that's already been approved by the board can be moved forward to start earlier, I don't think that is out of line with what's already been approved, and I think that would be a good practice for our town. Kevin, is that I'm not sure I fully understand what your true concern is.
I can't say anymore.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I mean, the fact is we approved two contracts, so a contract and a change order with Goodland, and the work's going to get done. And that contract is what that contract is. And it's a question of, are they going to start in May, or are they going to start a little earlier? And let's try to get them to mobilize as quickly as possible.
And I agree with that. I just want to, there's work that Goodland will be doing work for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of ADA. They're also doing infrastructure work for the benefit of a third party. We do not have an agreement with the third party finalized. And if the work is done and planned and en route and it benefits that third party will have a reduced incentive to come to the table for contribution. Matt has a little bit of leverage over a third party today.
See, Alex has joined. Do you want to comment on this, Alex?
As far as we had two schedules put together. One anticipating Boulder Valley would stay in school as they normally would, and we would start end of May in terms of closing the road. And we were anticipating that may not happen, that they would continue to do their distance learning, and that the schools would continue to be closed. And in that case, we were prepared to close the road on May 4th. And so that's where I'm proceeding, that I don't think the board said anything differently, that I'll move forward if Boulder Valley Schools is not going to reopen. I want to move forward and get it closed and get it safely constructed and make sure it's done before school starts in August. That's how we're proceeding.
And maybe it would help if we have a conversation about just what will be on future agenda items, future meeting agendas that could impact this conversation. Matt, can you speak to when any type of application that could impact the improvements, the 83 improvements would come before us?
Sorry if I seem a little distracted. I got a text from my wife, said my son broke his arm. They're at the hospital. So that's what I was texting about. So any application that may have a play in this project would be in June is what I'm anticipating. Although it would just be a contribution level at this point. The improvements have been defined by the project, the scope, and the contract, and those are moving forward.
Thanks, Matt. I also think it's reasonable for Matt to take off if you'd like.
My wife, she's a trooper. She's got it.
You could come in on the, Matt, in all seriousness, you could also just come in on the phone. There's a dial-in if you want to take it.
Yeah.
So, but your call. We'll try to be quick.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, anything else on that item? Okay. All right, then thoughts on meetings back at Town Hall, both for us, the board, and planning. I'm thinking the board and planning commission specifically.
Dan, I would like to hear legally what are our options when it comes to quasi-judicial involvement applications specifically.
So sure. So a lot of, as with a lot of other areas, there's a little bit of gray area having to do with a lot of these emergency measures and how far we can kind of take, the emergency authority. So I think different municipalities have kind of taken different perspectives on it. I think a lot of municipalities that we have kind of waited. We're kind of doing a waiting game of when this kind of resolves, then doing more of the quasi-judicial. Whereas other municipalities, I think actually Louisville is one of them, has actually passed an ordinance saying that, this is an emergency right now. And due to these extenuating circumstances, we're going to have quasi-judicial hearings remotely. So, I think if the town wanted to do something remotely, there's just certain things that you kind of have to make sure are taken care of. One of the concerns is making sure that, you have the public input, that each, individual is able to get on the record and give their own opinion about the application. A lot of what we've been doing is we've been having the applicant will sign some kind of a waiver saying that, we're going to be doing this remotely, I hereby agree to it. So, I think in general, there might be more risks to doing it remotely, but, given kind of the circumstances, everything that's going on, there are municipalities that are taking that action.
Well, our remote meeting policy that we adopted back in, when was that? At the special meeting that we had on March, allows for quasi-judicial hearings provided that we get a waiver from the applicant. And so as long as the applicant is okay with it, then we can go forward with a quasi-judicial meeting.
Yeah, and a lot of municipalities have been doing that recently. So that's certainly an option that the town can do.
And from a schedule perspective, that's our plan moving forward right now if we needed to. The next applications to come forward are the Marshall Bridge FDP and a replat of the Superior Shores FDP that needs to be done because of the way they're selling the lots. Those you would see in May, whether in person or virtually.
I mean, I think kind of going back to our earlier conversation, it's very difficult to predict more than a couple days out, maybe a week or two out, where we're going to be from a health and risk perspective. I can say without question, no matter what is announced this weekend, I will not be leaving my home on Monday for a board meeting or anything else. That's my personal comfort level. So I can say I won't, if we decide that we need to have Monday, the 27th meeting at Town Hall, then I will regretfully not be able to come. Beyond that, I don't know. I think none of us know how this is going to turn out, but that's my thinking on the 27th.
No, that's a fair point. And my comment was not directed to the 27th. I fully expect the 27th will be virtual meetings, same platform. I'm speaking more about meetings in May. So, and those first couple of hearings that Matt mentioned, I am comfortable with those, even going virtual on those. I'm more concerned with land use applications where I know there will be significant desire from the public to participate. And if we feel we can comfortably do it at Town Hall and not have that be more of a risk, then I want to explore that. But to your point, I totally agree. This is changing daily, weekly. So I don't think we make any decisions here. I just want to bring up the thought that at some point we are going to have to explore the option of, when do we transition back to Town Hall? So, okay, anyone have anything else on that?
I believe this is on the same topic. I would just say, I think even as we go back to Town Hall, I mean, we've certainly heard from citizens via Zoom that have specifically come out and said that they wouldn't come to Town Hall, but they have participated via Zoom. So I would like to see us, if possible, offer this even when all of us are back in Town Hall, even when there are some people in Town Hall. I think this is a great option for people to be able to speak their mind without having to leave their homes and things that they have going on there.
Okay.
I tend to echo Laura on that. I think, when we return to normal, this platform definitely provides an opportunity for someone to make public comment, from home. And I think it is something that we should seriously consider.
Okay, anyone else?
I'm generally in favor of that as well. And I think that we should just plan on not meeting in person in May and then kind of reassessing. But I would just, if I was a betting man, I would bet that we would not be meeting in person in May.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
All right, fair enough. Okay, Matt, could you provide us a little update on the prairie dogs, or Alex, provide us an update?
Yeah.
With respect to 88th Street.
Goodland. So there's prairie dogs in the construction area, the right-of-way area for the 88th Street project. Unfortunately, they need to be removed so that we can get the utility work started in that right-of-way area. Goodland has subcontracted with an environmental group that does this. Per our town guidelines, they're being trapped and then donated basically to the endangered raptor program that's out of Fort Collins.
Okay. Anyone have any other questions? Okay. All right, Kevin, alternative events.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. So a lot of us with kids have, a lot of kids' birthday party celebrations have been canceled, and this goofy thing has occurred, these drive-by parties. So we've done a couple, which are lovely, and they're safe because you're within your family, you're in your vehicle, and you're driving by and you're honking the horn and you're waving your kids' friends, and it's really lovely. taking that into a more community event, probably predicted where this is going. There's an emergence of drive-in theaters that are beginning to quite literally pop up. I thought about this just through a kind of a family discussion, and then I've since had a neighbor suggest the same thing. Is there an appetite? We're going to likely pivot away from in-person events. We've already canceled Arbor Day. We're going to cancel some other events. We're going to have some amount of money. It's not terribly expensive to rent a screen. The audio is given out, I think, either through, I don't know how it's done, FM, but they've somehow solved the technology problem. And assuming that social distancing rules are applied, and we'd have to think about it, is there an appetite? And I have no idea what the budget is. I don't think it's material, but is there an appetite to try to do a few fun drive-in movie type things in the town of Superior, thinking about locations that could be park. I don't know if there are parking lots. I don't know if it's Town 15. I don't know what the logistics look like. But just even before I start thinking about logistics, or Matt starts thinking about the logistics, what are your thoughts around something like this? Good idea, terrible idea? What do you think?
I really like the idea at first, Kevin. I think it's a great way to be creative and figure out how can we bring people together. My concern, though, is around, typically at drive-ins, I mean, they happen in the summer. People have all their windows open, and people get bored of the movie. They get out, they walk around, they go buy snacks, etc. I would only feel comfortable with it if we could figure out a way to, for lack of a better word, police that. I think that would be really concerning to me if we're bringing people together and then they're leaving their car windows open or walking around, all that kind of stuff. If most of the ideas that I would want to see move forward within the next couple months are for us not to gather in one place, but figure out how we can do things virtually. I say that like I live alone, and I have to tell you, it is really tough to not see other people in person. So I get it, but I'm worried that we'll be encouraging people to get together for something that will then actually end up with them face to face.
No, I hear you. Broomfield had the reason why I participated a couple weeks ago, why I listened to the Broomfield event was because they were making a decision around the golf courses. And I was just curious around what that decision would be. And ultimately they decided that golf courses can and should be open, but they can be open given certain rules, like no concessions at a golf course, no inside, but certainly, maintain the appropriate social distancing. So we'd have that, if we did something like this. I think your point around concessions is good. We would not have concessions stand. I don't think people would want to go to the movie and sit there in their rolled up hot window on a summer night. So, people are certainly going to have their windows down. They're going to be sitting on the hood, and they're going to be doing that. But assuming that the public health officials tell us that 6 feet is appropriate, that's why I was thinking about it. So
I think the challenge is going to be bathroom access. A lot of people will. No, I'm serious though. I mean, a lot of people are especially families, kids. They're going to need to get up and go to the bathroom during a movie, and then all of a sudden we're bringing people together for that. I don't know that that's something we're going to be able to solve.
So I think there's too many unknowns right now to know whether this is a good idea, bad idea, or otherwise. I like the approach Kevin initially took, where this is something we put in staff's hands and let them start thinking about it. And is there anything we can do to start planning? Laura, I'm with you. If we get to the point that social distancing restrictions are bumped back up, we're down to, I think that the governor said 60 to 65% social distancing, and hopefully in early June we're down to the 40s or whatever. If we bounce back up, clearly this is a bad idea. But if it's in line with state health orders at that point, I'm fully in favor of this. What I would take further, though, is I think we should be conservative in our planning for our current events. So obviously we have 4th of July coming up. There is the main event that's not too long thereafter, if I'm remembering the dates correctly. I know that we went over our vendor agreement with last meeting, but there are other costs that are associated with these as well. I know that we pay some of the artists and whatnot to come in for the main event. I would say let's be conservative, and if we are 1 or 2 months out, even more so, let's cancel these early on. If we go a year where we have to where we end up canceling maybe 1 or 2 events more than we needed, that's not the end of the world, especially if we're talking about alternative events. But that means if we cancel them early, we don't get ourselves into financial agreements that we actually have to expend those funds, and we can put them into maybe some of these alternative events that are actually feasible. And therefore, we're providing this service to the community in a more effective manner. So my direction to town staff would be to be conservative and cancel early, and to then go down the path that Kevin's suggesting and see what we can do otherwise.
Yes, and I guess what I would just add to that is while I certainly have concerns about the financial side of things, I also just don't want our volunteers and town staff to be taking time planning events that may get canceled. I mean, that doesn't feel good for anyone, to work really hard on something and then have it canceled. I would really like us to take a conservative approach and figure out what are the events we could have in the worst case scenario, and how can we make those events fun, and that way we run less risk of canceling, and also can just have an event that has been well thought out and well put together.
Yeah, I fully agree. If it was me making the decision right now, I'd probably be canceling already most of our events that are scheduled for the year.
Unfortunately, our events are successful because people show up, and that's the problem.
Yeah, I just want to come back to the drive-in movie idea. Kevin, I think that's the kind of out-of-the-box thinking that we should be thinking about. I have no idea if we could pull it off, and I think there's definitely some caveats, but I think it's worth looking into, because even though we may not be like right up next to each other, it is an opportunity for the community to come together and in a single place and enjoy an activity, because we definitely won't be having any movies in the park this summer. So maybe this is a good way to do it in an alternate way. And if you can't come because your little kid can't go to it may have to go to the bathroom or something, then that's the reality. We may just have to deal with that. But I like the idea.
Okay. Anyone have anything else? All right, good discussion, good retreat. Let's all retreat back to our evening plans. Matt, hope your son fares well in his arm recovery. And all right, we'll talk to everyone next Monday, if not before. All right, good night.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.